All right, call to order, Board of Directors Workshop for Thursday, June 5th, 2025.
Yes, Donovan.
Here.
Hawkinson.
Here.
Fortice.
Here.
Ottenbach. Here. Lillquist.
Here.
Sadoo.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
And board members Lund, Stewart, and Darren. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, item C, citizen communication. Is there anyone online who would like to unmute and address the board? Please do so now. Anyone in person? Not seeing it.
For the record, we didn't get any written.
All right, great. Item E, consideration of approval of agreement with Western Washington University.
Good morning. The item we're bringing forward today is a recommendation that the Board of Directors approve a contract with Western Washington University to provide unlimited fixed route and fair transit passes for the 25-26 school year to the summer quarter. A little background: in June of 21, the board approved a modification to extend WTA's agreement with Western to continue the student bus program. We added onto the agreement a clause to include staff and faculty. In 2024, we moved to a flat rate model. And then last year, our contract was based upon the 50 cents per ride. Ridership has stabilized, and so we're continuing to recommend a flat rate model this year. The one difference is that we have supported several different kinds of passes this last year, dynamic QR codes, 2 different kinds of passes that Western uses, and they are trying to move all of their mobile credentials over to mobile. And so this year we will be moving everything over to the mobile. So there will be just a few passes if people don't have that capability on their smartphones, but pretty much you'll see everybody from Western staff and students with the dynamic QR codes on their phone for their request. Any questions?
I have one. How many students do they have or what passes they get here, just approximately?
So for students, we think it's between 13 and 14,000. They were requested 20,000 QR codes per quarter to accommodate faculty, staff, and students. So just to be sure that we cover anybody, we're generating 20,000 codes.
Thank you.
They tell us about 85% of students have some sort of ridership.
Contract with the first year workers come to campus.
We believe it does, yes.
So I was looking at that graph in the materials, and Whatcom Community College was way at the bottom. Why is that? Like they are not using as much, or they are not connected as well?
They are. In fact, their passes work very well. They have their pass incorporated with their student ID. They just have, there's less people living on campus, less people riding the bus.
Oh,
Their numbers are increasing.
okay.
So year over year, we're seeing a slow increase at Whatcom Community College.
Yeah, I thought they would be kind of much higher on the revenue side.
But they have a lot of virtual classes.
Okay,
as well.
yeah,
50%, yes.
wow.
Gonna move the bus stop back to the VU now. Seriously, is that?
Oh.
Are you referring to?
We're down on Garden Street now instead of.
It's back up.
It's back up.
Yeah, it was just a 2-day detour because of disruptions on campus.
Good job, actually.
I would move approval of the contract.
Second.
Right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion, questions?
They may have missed it, but did you, the 600,000, so that's, how many riders is that? And then what is it per ride? Did you do that?
Seems
Well,
great.
if you average it out, we have just under 14,000 unique riders that we can see. And it's about 41 cents.
40 cents.
A big fit.
So we're subsidizing that. Pretty good. Wow, a lot.
I was gonna say that this is for 9 months or for all 4 quarters?
All 4 quarters.
All 4 quarters. And yeah, that comes to like a little over $30 per year.
Well, less.
Yeah, approximate. Yeah, I think.
So
talk to them.
this will actually tie into, later, we're talking about revisiting our fare structure. So the intent behind this one was to do a short-term setup so that we can get through this next school year while we decide on how we're gonna do fares. We're talking Western that will drive, and so we're gonna have to really work for the coming year on how this looks going forward. It could change significantly.
So how much a monthly pass cost for average citizen
Or $30 for an average citizen,
for a month,
yes.
right? That's $360 a year.
It's a heavy subsidy to Western.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Is the same, we are doing with the other colleges also, same ratio of discount.
Close, it's 50 cents a ride for Whatcom Community College, and then
What's the
student
total?
passes like
The
the
ride.
WTC
Okay.
are also half. So it's a little different situation with Western, but all student passes are reduced.
So we understand that students do need help, but.
And again, this is one of the reasons why we're revisiting fares. And we'll be starting this conversation later today.
Do we have any idea if it were $1 like everything else? Or if they bypass us like everyone else? What would this riders, does anybody have a clue?
What would that do, Rich?
Yeah.
If the rates were increased?
Well, if their rates were the regular rates, or maybe half the regular rates or something.
So general fare elasticity says like through, when they do national studies, say that for every 10% increase in fare, you're gonna drop 3% in ridership. It's really difficult to tell that in university environment.
And one of the reasons it's hard in a university environment is that the students pay for their bus pass as part of a collection of other fees.
Yeah.
And so the rates that the students are paying are kind of hidden to them.
Yep.
And so, we kind of almost treat them as a third party payer for that bus pass. So they don't have as much understanding of their costs. So we think the price elasticity is much smaller than third party payers.
One thing that is relevant, though, we did once achieve the highest ridership increase in the United States, and it was after we instituted a universal bus pass. Didn't have so much to do with the cost of the pass as it did just putting that pass in kids' pockets. So maybe someone who didn't think they wanted a pass enough to go out and get one, now just had one. And we saw, just a tremendous increase in the amount of ridership that we got at Western because they had a pass in their pocket.
Right. We'll talk about that a little later when we're talking about our fare structures, and you'll see when those increases happened historically.
And that's why I was saying we've got this for a year because we need to study in whole, as opposed to, I think one of the things we're talking about with fair, that we've done things to address problems individually without looking at, well, this is an opportunity to come back and look at whole, allow it holistically fits together.
Scott's question a bit, it wouldn't be like increasing it per ride, if the contract with Western to be increased and the students would.
right.
Yeah. And be hidden again, and they,
Yeah.
what's another $40 or some number?
The way it's done is the students pay that as part of their fees. It goes to Western. There's the, I'll call it the transportation fund for lack of a term. And so that goes in there. Western funds a bunch of things out of that fund. So from Western's perspective, that thing funds a lot. So the more, it's kind of a zero-sum game, if I can say it that way, that if we're raising that, they're lowering their ability to pay for other things that are a part of that transportation fee. And so that's why we need to really look at how this is done writ large. With taking their interest in mind, the students' interest in mind, how do we set up a better program that fits our fare system?
Do we extend something similar to the teachers and employees?
Yes, this includes all staff, faculty, students at Western.
That's something we can.
My bus pass on this.
Yes. You get free one anyways.
All right, anything further? All those in favor of approving the agreement with Western Washington University, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm abstaining.
You're abstaining.
It is my husband.
All right, item E. Consent agenda.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Any questions, comments, concerns? All those in favor of approving consent agenda, please say aye. Any opposed? That passes as well. All right, financial update.
I think just give a quick introduction. What the intent of this is give some factual information. Building towards the August workshop, where we're spending most of the day in August working on budget for 26, but also a plan going forward longer than that. And so this is an opportunity to talk about where not only what has happened, but also fares, fares still stuck in my head. Revenues and expenses, what makes up those things. And so there's a foundational knowledge heading into the August board workshop.
Thank you. Ally, if you don't mind, could we switch the order of F3 and F4? Sure. So I can land on revenues and we'll feed into the fair conversation. Okay. We're going to bring the Q4 report up on the screen, and I think you also have there was a handout here. So we're just going to revisit what 2024 looked like to give some foundation, and then we'll go to 2025. So the key points for the 24 financial performance were that we ended in a good financial position. Cash reserves were down about $4.8 million, and that's primarily due to the local share that we need to pay for our bus purchases. We do still have some buses that we haven't paid for that we will be requesting FTA reimbursement for, but we're confident that that money is available. There'll be a discussion on June 19th of the new master agreement. FTA has put out that some EI components that we need to make sure that we can sign that, and we'll talk with the board about the risks of signing versus not signing. Operating revenues came in slightly over budget, and if you recall, we did that adjustment to sales tax about $4.5 million earlier in the year, but things actually leveled out. We were right on target with sales tax, so we're just about $500,000 over on. Fares came in a little bit higher than budget, and so did the operating. Operating expenses came in at $5.6 million under budget, and there's sort of the same categories we've talked about in the past. Salaries and benefits. We're continuing to work to narrow that gap and identify through trends how many open positions we'll have during the year. But that's just sort of a tricky one to nail down. We also had outside services, and a lot of that were consulting and the projects we wanted to do to kind of set the stage to move projects forward in the future. So we had things like the paint booth design, we put that on hold pending the potential purchase of additional property we've talked about and what the best location for that would be. We had the Midway building design budgeted in. We decided to not move forward with that project. The Moab expansion and some ETS things. So ideas that we had programmed in that we kind of pivoted on. And you'll see some of those show up in 2025. Fuel and supplies were also down. And then capital revenue and expense both under budget, and that's primarily due to we budgeted for all the vehicles to be received, and we found that there were delays in there, so the payment and the receipt of revenue for those were delayed. And like I said, cash and reserves were down. We're still well positioned going into 2025 with about $52 million in cash. The following pages show the speedometers that we talked about that just show what our target is for revenues to expenses. We met our target at 87.3%, and actual expenses to budgeted we ended at 89.3% of budget. So we were down a little over 12% for those areas that I talked about earlier. If we go on to the revenue and the expenses, and we're talking about the sales tax decrease, and we're looking from 22 to 24 actual receipts compared to 23. We're down about 2.2%. And it's across all of the categories, manufacturing, construction, and tourism were all lower, not significantly lower. And then just Q4 to Q4 was at 1.9%. And again, it's those same categories. This could be reflecting sort of a decrease in consumer confidence. Talk about how that's out for 25. The next page are the year-to-date revenue and expenses, and this just shows how revenue expense compared year-to-date in the variety of categories. So just a graphical version of the income statement. See, most things were either fairly even or a little bit lower. Same thing for expenses. Just a graphical version of what's on the statement showing 2024 expenses above 23, but under budget. Not sure what this is, but the cash and designated reserve, this shows how our cash balance has changed over the past 5 years between, excuse me, what we have designated through board policy. Oh,
Yeah.
Rochelle, can you advance the slides, please? To
Page 6.
page 6.
Is she displaying the, I think she was displaying first quarter 25.
That's the right one.
So that's right.
You said being under budget, where is that in the visuals that we're looking at?
These are actually annual expenses, so they're not budget. So you would be looking at this page to see how we are under budget. The income statement page. So this page. So this page will show where we are with revenues a little bit over budget. Sorry, I don't have page numbers on here.
Okay, 2 documents, yeah. I think it was, maybe.
So I think we're on page.
It's just a cute one.
Okay, all right. So let's look at this page on the screen, the income statement. So Todd, this will show the actuals compared to budget. Those first 3 columns is actuals, budget, and then the variance between the two. So this will show the income statement with revenues a little bit above, and then you can see each category of the salaries and wages that were under budget. And again, we'll continue to monitor this through 25. Potentially, we may need a budget adjustment. We're finding that maybe sales tax is doing something we didn't expect, or maybe our expense budgets are too high or too low. So we'll continue to monitor that. But that's where we get that $5.8 million under budget.
This operating grant revenue,
Yes,
is this if federal money comes to you or state? Or
it's part state money, and the majority of it is the climate commitment action fund, so the transit support grants and the increased paratransit funding. And then we have a little bit of money that comes through from WashDOT. We don't take federal money for operating. Right now, we just take federal money for operating.
So like 23 is almost half of 24. Like it's 5.5 million in 2023 and 2024 is like
Yes.
almost 10 million.
So in 2024, when I-2117 went on the budget, we were advised to pull down as much money as we could. So we took the first 2 quarters of 25 and received that money in 2024. So you'll see the increase from 23 to 24, and then in 25, it'll go back down for just 2 quarters. So over the 3 years, it'll smooth, but we wanted to make sure we could draw down that revenue before it.
So when we're talking about the 26 budget, you'll see it go back up.
Yeah. So just these 2 years, these 3 years look a little bit. So Todd, on your question, would a graph in here be helpful, like a
No, I was just, I
graphical?
was working on the wrong document.
Oh, but I certainly can do a graphical of actual to budget. If visually that's more appealing than trying to.
No, finding this page made it.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the cash page, and then the final page is the balance sheet, where you can see, again, assets are what we own or what someone owes us. And then the liabilities are what we owe. So it's fairly stable. The categories that kind of change between cash and the reserves, those we monitor every year and make an adjustment based on our capital plan and our fleet plan. the balance sheet overall is fairly steady. You can see in December column, the other receivables, that 20 million, those are revenues that we are expecting, grant revenues that we were due in 24, but we didn't receive.
Those are the federal capital grants
Correct.
we're still waiting on.
We have them now. What we're waiting on is we have 4 hybrid buses that we haven't accepted yet. We have 4 hybrids that we haven't accepted and paid for, now we'll get these, and then we have the 8 electrics that we haven't paid for and haven't requested reimbursement. So you see these kind of move along, but if we had received all that money at the end of December, our cash would.
So, the one more item on the equity side,
Sure.
retirement of contributions. The $21 million. Last item.
Aaron, are you online?
Steve is a little bit out of focus also. Is projecting.
It's not just me.
It's in the
All
coffee.
contacts in there.
Sapple, can I get back to you on that? I don't know that answer right off the top. of
Okay,
my
no
head.
problem.
This last item. I believe it has to do with federal funds that we have received in the past,
Something,
but
yeah.
let me follow up for you. So that's where we ended 24, heading into 25. Are there questions, more questions on that? Okay. So next we'll go into 2025, just quarter 1.
And this is back in your packet.
This is one's in the packet. Let's see, page 14, starting on page 14. All right, so for Q1, we did get our March sales tax receipts in after the packet was prepared, so talked about that a little bit. It's not reflected in these numbers. But for sales tax, January was up 6.8%. February was down 4.9 and March was down 6.7. So overall, it's a 2.1% drop from quarter 1, 2024. Manufacturing and construction were the largest drops. For 25, we budgeted a 2% increase in sales tax. So we're a little bit behind for Q1. Again, we're going to continue to watch that. I think it could be due to several factors, including consumer sentiment about just what's going on in the country right now. We have the election trends, the border traffic is down quite a bit. Housing prices have changed a little bit. They're actually decreased from last year. And unemployment is down also. So we have kind of competing factors on both sides of what could happen with sales tax. So again, we'll watch this like we did last year. If it changes significantly from our projections, bring that back to you.
Some of the interesting things just by sector on that saw was that lodging and food was up slightly, construction was down, which I guess makes sense, winter months. So we'll have to see where that goes as summer months come up and construction increases. How does that all figure that piece?
With all the construction you see, I will increase this a little bit as well. Hopefully, that will hit our.
And as you all are tracking your cities, county, so forth, yeah, there's information in the town that you could share that you're seeing and talking about too, that sure is helpful.
But the dirt movers are slow. So the initial part of construction, if you talk to the Stremlers, the WRS, they're not busy like they want.
I was gonna say, I just talked to one of the owners of Tiger Construction last night. He said they only have one project going on right now and they're almost done with it. So those, like you said, those first stage construction people are very slow, which I think foretells what's not coming up in the future.
Is their book of business public work or is it?
It's a combination of both.
Combination.
Yeah, there's a lot of construction going on, but I think like housing starts are way down.
Yeah.
It just generally, things are down.
I was tracking the number of permits issued and everything. It's not that much down, but people have permits and they're the 5-year vested period. So people come and get their permits, but they're not starting work. Yeah, so we thought that if the permits are going steady, so there will be work, but it's not, yeah.
Is there some large manufacturing? But that 17% drop quarter to quarter, like, was there some spike in 23 that was unusual that explains that, or is that?
It's
a
our,
big- it's a big number.
it's our opinion that we were all living on the COVID money and spending it.
Yeah. But on but what gets coded as manufacturing.
And a lot of us did one-time things like capital items with that money,
Yeah.
because it was one-time money, and that one-time money dried up. We stopped spending.
44 million for the county.
Potentially manufacturing could be just the cost of goods or the supply chain. The sales tax information when it comes in is very, it goes by category, but we don't really have the ability to dive further into who's it coming from, what counties it's
Yeah.
from, what cities, so we have that information, but we don't have a lot of detail. Forrest, are you seeing anything at the city that?
We're big number.
We're fairly flat, and we're meeting our budget targets, but we're starting to see some, what we think is the beginning of a downward trend for sure. And I mean, but just to speak to manufacturing, at least in the city, manufacturing represents such a small portion of our sales tax that it can be pretty variable based on, I don't know if that's the same for the countywide, but yeah, we're definitely worried too, so.
All right, so we're sort of hearing it in all of our jurisdictions and see.
Yeah.
We'll kind of monitor that, and adjust if we need to.
And to your point on manufacturing, most of that is resale. So you have a lot of manufacturing going on, but it's sold outside of the area. Like the company I was involved with, very little sales tax was generated from the millions of revenue because it's sold it to other states or other countries. And it's sales tax free.
You may not be able to share this, but is Leaded Dorsey?
Oh, I haven't asked them. They're still building like it's gonna happen, so.
Yeah.
Them buildings.
They've stopped hiring though. They were hiring constantly all the time. I haven't seen ads for them in months.
Yeah, one of my favorite leading economic indicators is how many applications we get as the government, right? Our application numbers are way up.
Which indicates.
Yeah.
Which is not.
Yeah, exactly.
Lot of
Applicant quality of application.
we have a big federal pool of applicants.
Are there leading indicators, like Forrest kindly mentioned that you'd like us to track and talk about? That would be helpful? You don't have to answer that now, but if there are things, said Sean and I have a note.
I think the construction is because construction is such a thing. It gives many times, starting from the permit fees, then they start buying materials, and then they build the jobs, which brings in revenue expenses, people spend money, and then once the building is finished, and then the property tax starts forever. So I think construction is such a factor. It impacts all the way for long term.
Well, I think there's big funding issues. Construction right now. Lenders are nervous.
I think it's uncertainty right now. It's uncertainty, confusion in the marketplace. People even want to do stuff. They say, let's just wait out.
Another item that I just remembered is the turnaround at BP. I don't know if you've heard, it went sideways. They were doing a coker rebuild. They welded the new bases in the cokers and the wells were bad. And there was a 30-day delay at $1 million a day lost revenue.
Yeah.
And BP cut back on all their capital projects. And like Anvil is out of work. My brother-in-law decided to take early retirement because of it. I mean, so Yeah. And so there's a big chunk of our economy that, you know, not only is not making money, but is spending more than they wanted to. Anyway, so that's a little ripple, but it's probably a fairly major ripple. And when you look at all the engineering firms in Bellingham and how they depend on that industry to be thriving, there's a lot of jobs there that are in tenuous at this point. That's not them.
I mean, so the other indication is, we just put a bid out or statement of qualifications for the new jail center. 6 people responded, and these were 6 pretty good people, being good sized firms. So there's appetite for work out there, you know. We were very pleased and very quality responses.
That's what I was hearing as well, that bidding is getting much more competitive and there's more bidders on projects. So again, it's just kind of a scarcity of work thought that if I don't get this project, I'm not going to have work for my employees, so.
They
And
need to
you
bridge
base-
the gap also, because waiting for future.
Right, yeah. Crews.
Yeah.
Yes, you know, play
Yeah.
off, try to find them again.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we can use our responses also. That's great, thank you. We've got some notes that I can throw on for the future. And we'll look at the income statement here, but the operating grants are going to be down, and that's again because we didn't draw anything for Q1 or Q2. You see that rebound in Q3 and 4. Operating expenses continue to be under budget through Q1. That's fairly typical. We probably try to fill positions in Q1 and sometimes plays a little bit in May. So I think that will pop up. We're about 1.7 million under budget at the end of Q1. Again, a big one is outside services, and we expect those to start to creep up. We do have a number of projects that we're going to be looking at. We've got the community survey going on how our community feels about transit. We just closed on our second purchasing of Million Trees property. We've got the facility master plan going, some HVAC upgrades, and then completing the rapid transit phase 2 study. So those are all contracted out projects that we're working on that we will see come through the end of this year. Capital expenses are over budget, and that again has to do with vehicles that we have paid for that we hadn't seen for reimbursement. So it's the catch up from last year showing through Q1. And again, we will see the grant revenue come through. We'll have that $11 million for the electric buses that we'll talk about.
So they're answering their emails now.
They are answering their emails slowly. They are.
It's still centralized.
We're not getting a lot of guidance on some of the things like the FTA master agreement. Les has been talking to an attorney we hired that handles that. So I think there's still some vagueness within FTA itself. But we are at least getting responses and have high confidence that the money will still be there.
So we're having to cover the timing issues.
Exactly.
So we have to cash flow that, well,
Purchases.
yeah. And so that affects us, in the other income with interest. that we're
Yeah.
using.
How many dollars a day? So
$1,000.
But yeah, if you take the 20 million that we're supposed to get, and some of that's coming in, but we figured that was about $1,011 a day interest that we're losing.
So the 10 million down in the reserves is the 20 million we spent on capital expenses.
Correct. Yeah, so we're seeing the flow of that come through and then when those dollars.
And
come
how,
in,
and of that 20 million that we spent, is that like 85% reimbursed?
most of them are 85%.
So we get a good chunk of it back,
Absolutely.
provided they come through.
highly confident.
We're confident, we're more confident than we could have told you at the end of Q4. That would. And then we'll be talking later on in the year about federal grant revenue and how we may want to handle that differently. Given that there's a little bit uncertainty, do we want to kind of draw that one down earlier and use it for operating expenses or some other types of, so that'll be an in-depth conversation. Likely this conversation.
And it would be for capital, not
For capital.
operating. Yeah, just using it differently so we can draw on interest as opposed to having it in the federal government.
I mean, in our pocket. So there'll be more to come on that. So if we go to page 15, these are just, again, those cost recovery with GOs. Where Q1, we were at 82%, our goal is 80. And fares and sales tax were just a little bit above Q1 of last year. The actual operating expense to budget, we were at 87% for Q1. I don't want to be lower than 85%. So again, we met that. But again, we have those areas that are under budget. Page 16 just shows a graphical Q1 sales tax revenue, and we pulled this back to show a 10-year period of actual versus budget. See, often it varies throughout the years, whether one is higher than the other, but our linear trend is going up. It's a positive trend. So we've seen sales tax for the past 4 years, 5 years exceed our budget. May not be by a lot, but it has exceeded our budget. So Michael, is this kind of what you were looking for with the 10-year graphs? Okay, fantastic.
The one note on 25 is, as Shana mentioned earlier, we did do a budget amendment, reduced our sales tax. So we have to compare it, yeah, in 20, or 24, yeah.
Do you know what that line works out to as annual increase, percentage increase, average?
I don't, but
But it's still below inflation. In real dollars, we are losing money because.
That's why I don't, yeah.
Or is it at inflation?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little over, I think it's a little over 1% a year.
Average.
Yeah.
Our, ability to raise property taxes 1% maximum in a year, right? Sales tax varies anyways. And inflation is 2.5%, 3%. So in real dollars, we are losing 1.5% to 2%, even if it is flat. And in 5 years, it really starts making impact. 1 year, year to year, it may not show serious numbers, but when you accumulate for 2 bienniums, it's substantial.
Yeah, that's a zipper graph or alligator graph, want to call it, this just keeps growing.
Yeah.
Even if it is a slow.
Only makeup is the new construction, new properties coming online, make up all that, for the sales tax and the property tax. And that has been flat now last couple of years. I mean, it was amazing. During COVID, there was so much construction going on. We had to go to the state to get special permission to allow construction to continue during COVID. There was so much rush for and then it just tapered down.
I have a question on, so if it's projected that the actuals are, over budget for sales tax revenue, but on the other page, for the first quarter, we were expecting a 2% increase, but we got a 2% drop. How does that? I would almost, from what we just saw on the other page, that the orange bar would be higher than the blue bar, or maybe.
I think there's some seasonality that goes, so it may be down a little bit in March, but some of the other ones we're expecting to go on.
So that's just, the 2.1% drop is for the first quarter, and we budgeted 2% increase, and that'll smooth out somehow over.
If the modeling through the rest of the year comes out, I don't know. And so that's where the 25 is based on looking through estimates throughout the rest of the year. So I would take the 25.
And Todd, so the income statement and this graph do not include the March receipts. So when we prepared this, we didn't get March numbers till May. So this is January, February actuals and our estimate for March.
It's a similar presentation from our.
So the apples,
They got the
not
data,
apple to apple.
the day they were making the presentation, like we just got the data
Yes.
in May for March.
So we made this presentation and then we got the March data. So you're seeing that in the summary, but what you're seeing on page 20 in the income statement is sales tax is up a little bit, and that would the gain in January offset with the loss in February, what our estimate for March is.
Shawna, can I ask a question and an observation? The question is, this linear fit here, was that done by hand or did, your spreadsheet actually do that mathematically to put it in the right place?
Yes.
It's not, okay, so I can trust it. So I can trust it. What I'm seeing here is that, the actual revenue goes up and down from that linear fit, but not that much. The true variability is in our budgeting, where we're having to guess, and we underguess, and we overguess, and we underguess, and overguess, because it's an impossible game to play. But the true signal in the actuals, I see the explicable dip, COVID, I see the explicable overshoot, and then the return to norm. And so actually, it's a pretty, and the story makes sense.
Yes.
But then also the second story is us going back and forth trying to figure it out.
How do we budget?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2020 was the only year that it didn't outpace the budget. And so what we wanted to be able to show with this graph is what do we expect over time for it to do? We have those ups and downs, but generally over time. And I think Josh is corrected about 4%, but I do have that. Should just not in front of me. Are we ready to move on to page 17? So that's just a graphical of the Q1 revenues. And you may be asking why sales tax is almost 92% when usually it hovers around low 80s. And that is because the overall revenue pie got smaller with that operating grant. So we will see this kind of change. It will look like this for Q2 also until we drive down the operating grants, and then it will pop back up. So although the revenue pie is essentially the same, just the components in the pie changed. We talked about these revenues pay really all of our daily operating expenses. And the revenues were 1.7 million lower than the operating expenses in Q1. And then the difference between the revenue expense we cover out of our reserves, out of our cash flow. The next page, page 18, is the same graphical for expenses. And you can see we've talked how sales tax usually covers salaries and benefits. Salaries and benefits were 79%. So we have a little bit of that decrease again, just because the size of the revenue. Again, salaries, wages, and benefits are the largest portion. And that expense was basically equal to what we received in sales tax for the first quarter. Page 18 just shows, page 19 shows again the cash and the designated reserves, and you can see how that just moves through. And then again, you can see the decrease between Q1 and Q24 and 25, and again, those are those dollars that were moving on from the federal government. And we just have our little COVID one in the past. And then we move on to the income statement. And then you can see total revenues up just slightly over 24 at $2,000, expenses lower by $7 million from our budget. And then our capital expense, again, accounting for those changes throughout the years. And then the income statement, which again, fairly stable. And the cash and the designated reserves, and it varies how we do that through the year. But we're sitting really stable for Q1 despite some of these fluctuations. Yeah, we'll see how those pan out over the next couple of quarters. Any questions on Q1?
I answered my own question, about 7% increase in sales tax over that 10-year period. So that beats inflation. And I guess I'll also say, as I said earlier, I'm worried that we're so sales tax dependent, and if sales tax doesn't grow, and we're 80% employee wages and benefits, that's a train wreck over time.
And we've been talking about that.
Yeah.
Some of our scenario planning. So that'll be where we'll do the deep dive in
Yes.
looking at that alligator graph, and then we'll play with our model on assumptions that we make so we can see how that changes, and we'll talk about what is the board looking for over time. Are we looking by 2030 to have them equal, or looking by 2027 to have a smaller deficit. And then we'll be able to play with the things that change, which we'll talk about in this next presentation. And really be looking for guidance on how we program that.
And I guess as we get into our fair discussion, I think, at least in my mind, that weighs heavy in my mind, what to do with fairs if this is an unsustainable model.
Part of that is not just the financial component, but what are the outcomes that come with that?
Sure.
Like, if you say, okay, you want to do X% cut,
Yeah.
what does that really mean? Service, and those kinds of things, to understand the full picture.
I've been here too long because I remember those cuts in 2010 or 11, and they weren't fun. But they were a requirement. Yeah.
And I think the difference between then and now is that the board has been good about reserves. And so there are ways I think we could do this that will, I mean, they still will have cuts, but sure, it won't be that dramatic, right? What happened on that one.
Follow on that. So going back to the previous report, annual 2024, this page, this is P1, has to do with reserves. Does this have so this one for Q1 has the yellow COVID dollars pulled out. Does this have COVID dollars pulled out?
It includes COVID dollars, but we don't have that line that
Okay,
shows
so
it, so.
the yellow thing isn't in there. Yeah, but this is what could get us through a sales tax downturn or flattening and could bridge us for a year and a half, right? It didn't, this isn't sustainability, but it is resilience.
Right, yeah, this says we can keep going for a while.
Yeah.
But we've got to watch it close because a while will end.
Well, I think that's the point. So if we manage our finances prudently, we will build in resilience, which means that we can endure through short cycles. But then the other thing is the long-term sustainability. It doesn't answer that question. And so we have to watch out for both, have enough resilience in the short term, short meaning year, and then sustainability, now we're talking 5, 10. Is our model even gonna work?
So I think that's what we'll talk about in August. Yeah.
So I have okay, so what sales tax increase would we need over inflation to be sustainable?
It's a high one, and we'll be able to.
Well, and I think one of the things we'll have to talk about is how do we define sustainability? Is it a status quo? Is it a, the old saying about, water your flowers or your weeds, is it that kind of thing? Is it, how do we account for and we'll talk about this later with the comp plan and the estimates of population coming in. Right, so the sustainability thing we'll have to model and what our goals are.
I guess for my thinking, I mean, if that graph is 7% average over 10 years, is 7% sales tax growth enough for us to keep doing what we're doing, or do you actually need more than that or less than that?
I think it'll depend, that's a good question, and it depends what we do with our expenses also,
Right,
right? If they continue to grow.
but knowing that 80% of our expenses employees,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can play around with the 20%, but you're not playing around with the problem.
I'd like to respond to last year's cycle. What is sustainability? For me, baseline minimal sustainability is WTA service has to grow with population. If we don't keep pace with population growth, then we're definitely going backwards. And if population growth is at X%, sales tax growth is at Y%, and expense growth is at Z%, I really hope all those percentage growth things are in line. Because if they're not, then we can't meet my goal, which is the minimum. We just got to keep pace with population growth, therefore with sort of a measure of demand.
But to your point, then, if sales tax, if the population, the wage and benefit growth is going to be the COLAs, you say. And we have a hard time covering the COLAs with sales tax increase. How can we grow?
We've had a version of this chart where, depending on what ambitious plans we have, this all went negative very quick.
Yeah.
But not here right.
And that is based on what we're doing now is projected out with no additional growth. But Michael, your question, your comment is interesting, because right now we have a lot of capacity on our buses that we could fill with riders, which,
Right.
like Scott,
We
you
can't
said,
grow
if that's
service, but we
easy to
can
do,
grow riders.
we would do it, and it's hard to do. So do we continue to expand service and have more capacity on our bus, even though the population's growing? Like, how do
Okay,
we
so
close
maybe I
that
said that
gap?
wrong.
Get them on the bus. How do we
Maybe
do that?
actually, our ridership should keep pace with population growth. And yeah, if we can use similar or same amount of buses but have increased ridership, just because there's more people getting on every bus. Now the buses are a little more full, but not too full. Yeah, and the largest picture, we have to at least serve our community as well as we're serving them now. If we don't do that, don't keep pace with that, then we're drifting backwards in terms of like actual value.
And that's a great pin in the conversation for later on, when we're talking about our philosophy. That's why we're going through this exercise.
Anything else on Q1? Okay, then we'll move into the revenue and expense. And as Les said, this is just a high-level introduction on what's contained in revenues and expenses, and sort of the things that we have control over monitoring. So do you need one spot?
Well, it's gonna be up there.
It's gonna be up here.
All right.
Okay. So I'm not gonna read the slides, so I'll just kind of walk through, but I welcome questions on thoughts or ways that we can manage some of these things.
And part of the reason, in August, Sean has developed a great monitoring system that we can change assumptions going in. If you raise sales taxes, what happens? If you lower sales taxes, what happens? Those kinds of things. So understanding what the revenues and the expenses are will give a foundation so that when we go into that modeling, we have an idea what can we change and how much.
And this doesn't include all revenues and all expenses, so we just kind of been a little just with that. So Rochelle, can I have the next slide, please? So these are our 2025 budgeted expenses. Again, by category, percent, and dollar amount. So you can see, like we just talked about, wages and benefits are the largest. And then they go down from there. And just things I just wanted to share of what's in these categories, so we can start talking about what we have some control over is the outside services we talked about, consulting, professional services, but it's also temporary help, custodial, landscaping, and our transit access funds are. So some of those we can't really change if we want to continue the level of service. There is some things that we have control over, and that's kind of what we'll be asking the board of what are you interested in looking at? Supplies and materials.
Before we leave outside services, just to point out that 6 million is about 3 million over average. And the reason it's so much higher this year is we were investing in trying to get shovel ready projects so that with the uncertainty that we would be ready if grants came available, we have things without behind the eight ball. So that's why we all chose to invest more this year. So just.
And that was high in 24, high in 25, and again, you would expect that to drop down. Supplies and materials, tires, printing, software, technical supplies, repair and maintenance. Again, there's a little bit of variation in that. Fuel, that does include the electricity to run the buses, gas, diesel, and propane. So as we bring more of the e-buses on, the components of this category will change. And then based on price of electricity, gas, and all of those things, which are all volatile, there's some variability within
So
that.
just to clarify, Shauna, you're saying, we probably have several, electrical accounts, and we have a separate, meter that goes to the end. That'll be fuel, and running the building lights, that'll be in utilities.
Exactly.
That's great.
And we did that right as soon as we brought those e-buses on to track that. So you'll be able to see, if we want to dive into fuel later on this year, we'll be able to see how those components have changed as for the buses.
And presumably if we added, bid route charging at a station, we put it in a separate meter and track it separately. That's great.
Insurance and claims, this is really our insurance premiums that we pay to the Washington State Transit Insurance Pool. We went out to market probably, I'd say 5 years now, and found that pooling was still the best rate for us. And we haven't had any claims with WTA that have exceeded the insurance coverage. So there's really nothing out of our pocket for claims. The limit that was to pass is 25 million. So hopefully that exceeds that. This is our insurance. What caused variability in that is it's based on miles traveled, our number of employees, our safety rating, and then what's driven by the market. So we take our 3 components and then it's layered on with what market rates are. So again, there's some components that we have a little bit of control over. Michael, as you said, okay, utilities are really just the regular utilities to run our OAB in our stations.
I can hop back to insurance.
Absolutely.
So the kind of takeaway is when we're talking about service, and we add more miles, there is a secondary effect of insurance, goes up with that. When we purchase new property, that adds more real estate owner, which causes our insurance to go up. So when it's going up by 10% a year, there are some things within our control that drive that and other things that are not.
We receive an appraisal every 3 years, but our rates are indexed every year. We do a true up of what our estimates were with what really happened. It's a true up.
Sean's president, so she knows all
Oh,
this.
not any longer.
No, you like her. Oh, past presidents.
It's the best position to be. And then the other 2 are education, so conferences, meals, refreshment, and then our general expense. So these are the categories that just make up the expenditures.
What is it, general expense?
General is postage, fees and licenses, dues, advertising, banking fees, investments. The catch-all for everything else. And I can send the notes out on this, but we just thought it would be helpful for you to know what goes into that and some things that we may or may not have control over.
Again, as we're going into the modeling, what are those things that we can play with and what are those things? we can play with?
Any questions on that? Next slide, please. And these are just some components that have changed over the years for expenses. So here's our medical rate changes by year. We have our insurance through the Association of Washington Cities. And they determine these rates every year. You can see really for the most part, 2020, we'll just pull that one out. Rates have increased. 23 and 24, there was a decrease, which was nice to see, at least with the regions. And then in 25, they popped back up pretty quickly. So again, we don't have a lot of control over this. Back 2014, we were self-insured, and I think there was information that maybe that was not the most cost effective. Vanessa, is there anything I'm really missing on that component?
We have a cost share with employees.
For medical, right?
For medical.
There is an employee
I
contribution.
just wanted to ask first that you looked into the Teamsters Medicare Trust. So we as a county, 2020, were facing the same thing. And we were shopping, and at that time, we went with the Teamsters Trust, Welfare Trust. And it is nationwide. It's a big, and other thing was that we have 40-50% of our employees are Teamsters. So
That's why.
and
That's why it works.
no, I mean, that just prompted us to explore into that. And we save over $1 million a year, and we actually improved our benefits, which some of the people were opting go with Teamsters, so we had split and all this. So I think you should explore, you can connect with the county people.
Yeah, and Vanessa's
We
here.
have a benefits committee that
Please
looks.
explore with them. We are very happy. It's been 4 years now, and we changed in 21. And we explored that in 2020. And the savings are, and the rates are very constant. And employees are very happy with the benefit package also.
Okay, thank you for that. But one more thing on the benefits. WTA has earned what's called a Well City Award through AWC, so we received a 2% decrease on our premiums. And most years where don't see an increase in vision, dental, EAP, it's really the medical that is driving that.
We're approaching the end of this section, so we'll kind of pick up the pace a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And, so we have time for theirs.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so next slide is just insurance premiums. So you can see kind of how that's varied over time. The decrease in 21 was due to the large decrease in miles. And then we'll talk a little bit about overhead. This has come up a few times, but you can see just this graph. Next graph, please. Overhead as a percent of total cost by mode. And then what we've included in overhead is marketing, executive, finance, and HR. So folks that are really driving what service on the street is.
I should point out, overhead for this purpose is really, because that's our highest cost thing, so it does factor in cost of operating the building, those kind of overhead costs.
Correct. And if that's something the board's interested, we can do that exploration also. Next slide is just the administrative FTEs. So we did talk about how this looks over time. So this is a count of administrative FTEs just over the year. So 24, we had 34 out of 318. So they're really sitting at that 10% type of level. And administrative, it went from 20
to 18 total employees. Do you mean actual FTE equivalents? Or do you mean the actual employees?
FTEs.
Okay.
If that was a ratio, it'd be pretty flat.
It'd be pretty flat. We increased from 22 admin staff to 35 between 2010 and 2025. So pretty slow growth. And we have added a lot in the past couple of years, really to do that catch up.
Yeah, I'll say that it's that back of the house thing that we recognized as being a strategic threat to the organization. So we had one payroll person, as an example, when we had 100 employees and had one payroll person, 300. And you can imagine if that person were to leave, get sick or something, we're almost 100. And then more complicated leave laws is another example that requires more people to administer. So trying to look at that, so trying to slow that, but still keep the organization able to run with these new complex regulatory things.
Next slide, please. Now we'll jump into revenues. Here's our 25 budgeted revenues, and you can see the components and the percentages. Sales tax, 0.6 of every dollar. Advertising is ads placed on the buses. Other revenues, property rentals. We put in an estimate for the base camp rental, operating grants we've talked about, and fair revenue. Next slide, please. This is just a repeat of that sales tax revenue slide. We've got the linear budget and the linear actual. And actually our average from 2015 to 24 is a 6.5 increase.
So this graph is updated with the new numbers, because it looks different than the.
Yeah.
It is updated. Correct. And then the final slide is just fair revenue. So you can see what has happened with that over the years. In the early years, we did have the city transportation benefit district providing us quite a bit of money over the past years. This is that is not reflected in this. This is just fair revenue. And including the Western contract and the Whatcom Community College. So right, 2021, we went fare free for a good portion of that. And then you can see how fares have dropped off in 22, but they're kind of growing back up. And that will, Utter and Josh will talk more about that with their fare presentation.
So the city's transportation fund, that was about 1.4 million a year.
It was.
So if you chop 1.4 million off of these, it kind of looks.
This is just fares.
This-
Sorry, that's not reflected.
They're excluded.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I misspoke.
Does this reflect ridership or a fare change?
It reflects what we're getting, what our fare box is telling us about folks paying or coming in or.
Yeah, so it does connect with ridership that, yes.
Fares haven't changed demonstrably in this time period.
Fares
So
haven't changed
We
since-
we did go fare free for you, and so. Yeah, that's
And during COVID, we were fare free, which is why.
Yeah.
we got
And
that.
for, because a lot of riders are, bus passes, it isn't a perfect correlation because you may be getting on 20 times a month or 30 times per month. So what you're paying, so the fare revenue is the same for those two people.
I think the other thing is if you look in real dollars, $2015 and $2025, right? The drop is even more dramatic than what we see on the graph.
The board had a 15% fare recovery ratio goal, and we're at
Yeah.
3.8.
Yeah, that's all.
Well,
Yeah.
It's moving quite a bit from year to year.
Yeah, but right now, it's about over time. It's
Oh, if you average everything?
Yeah.
Yes, about just under 4%.
just.
When I started on the board, it was about 10.
When I started, it was 15.
It was actually at 15.
It was at 15, I looked it up yesterday. How much of this is due to kids riding free and,
We're gonna talk about all that.
all right.
Great question.
That was the kind of intent of the agenda. Flow right into that.
So we'll segue into Josh and Audra, and if there's any other questions that come up, feel free to email me. I can get back to you, and I'll follow up on those two. For the next. Thank you.
On to revisiting fares.
All right.
While just getting set up on here, what we decided to do was, if you recall, 2 years ago, we were looking at, order request to talk about fare free, that's a system. We had all decided to put that on pause while we tried to figure out with volatility and things that were going on, how much do we need that revenue and so forth. And so this is we had 2 years, this summer, we were gonna pick it back up. And so in light of a number of factors, volatility, federal guidance, a bunch of different factors, we decided we should look at the complexity of our fare system. We should just look at what would we like it to be if we were just starting over. Kind of how would we design this to work? Obviously, there are factors that come in, replace all your fare boxes as a cost, those kinds of things. But the idea here is, and Josh and Audrey would lead the team to look at other options to do. So the intent of today is just to lay out what those are, and get an understanding of our current fares, what are the potential options, and then we'll talk a little bit more next month, and then try to narrow down to what are 1 or 2 options for staff to go start investigating. And then we'll have workshops and things of that nature to move. Is that, I rambled on longer than you.
I can skip 5 slides back.
Well, good morning, everyone. And as Les mentioned, and as you saw from Shonda's slides. Oh, I gotta switch here. As you saw from Shonda's slides, Les formed this team to explore how we could expand, how we can increase revenue, and reduce our costs. And really what we're focused on is net fare revenue. So understanding what goes into the cost of collecting fares and what revenues get out of it. As Les mentioned too, we had to dive deeper and wanted to expand our scope to improve rider experience, revisit our partnerships. And as the Audrey discussed, our Western contract, for example, is a significant partnership and dollar amount in our fare revenue. And also respond to those fare free questions. The structure of this review, the team decided on to present 4 options to the board. Felt that this would help the board in comparing and contrasting the different opportunities that we have and help encourage a vigorous discussion and hopefully allow us to set policy. Today, we'll review our current fare structure. That's what we see as status quo. So we can see what our baseline is. And then we'll also preview today 3 additional options. Going fare free, an option where we raise our fare rates, but keep essentially our same system, so our same passes and products and things, but raise our rates in general. And a 4th option where we raise our rates, but also change how we collect fares and the method of which we account for them. So a significant shift in the fare product set, and introduce that as part of a new platform. Today's presentation, as Les said, is just the start of a months-long conversation with the board. And so as we go through today's presentation and then frankly throughout the rest of these months, here's a couple of questions we'd like you to keep in mind. So first, what information will help you decide on an option? Please let us know. How could our fare system be improved? And then thinking about some of the value options, value questions that we have, be thinking about what percent of fare revenue, what percent of revenue should fares be? We saw earlier in Shonda's presentation that fares are 3.7% of revenue. What should they really be? And what are your other thoughts on fares in general? This will help us as our goal in August is to have this board select a preferred option or two to continue on with the discussion there. So to narrow it down. I'd like to take a moment just quickly to introduce our team, who's actually not all in the room. I was expecting that, so that makes it a little interesting. Okay, Tiffany in the back from IT is on our team, Sandy from operations, Andy from IT, and of course Audrey here, who's co-presenting with me from finance. The team has been very busy working to develop a model where we can explore both the ridership elasticity and the net revenue of the different options. So we're putting together a modeling for that. We have been meeting with our vendors to try and understand what options they can help provide, what's new in the fare industry. We've also been connecting with our other transit agencies, including Skagit Transit, who we kind of almost share a fare system with today, as well as reached out and had conversation with the Orca system down in the Central Puget Sound region. We have been engaging with our community partners, including Northwest Regional Council, who's the non-emergency medical transportation provider coordinator broker, I guess, for the region, as well as the Opportunity Council and more to come. Turn it over to Andrew.
All right, this first slide is our historical revenue versus ridership. So we're
Just ask a question. So what you're gonna do is that number one shows that's the first option, status quo.
yes.
So when they see two and
It'll be
subsequent
fare
slides,
free and then, that's right. So we're gonna start with status quo. And we're gonna look where we have been, our historical revenue versus ridership. So this does include our Western contract. And what we're seeing happen is as we come out of COVID, that our ridership is recovering, and we can talk about some reasons for that. But these are projected numbers through the end of 2025. By April 30th, we have about 37% of our ridership for the year. So we can extrapolate what that's gonna look like through the end of the year. And our revenues are at about 30% for the year. So we can, with some accuracy, predict what this year's gonna look like. And those lines are starting to move apart. So that's one of the things that we want to bring to your attention.
This scale on the left-hand side, if it's 5 million, is the number of trips take?
Nope, those are dollars. Dollars and trips. So what you were talking about earlier, where it's not one-to-one, we have a dollar fare. You might have, the number of rides and the number of dollars is not the same.
Okay. That's fine.
So, I mean, one thing that would cause the divergence, where ridership could keep increasing, but fare revenue goes down, could be that more people are using passes and riding along, that they're getting a heck of a lot of, if we have more people using passes and people are utilizing the passes more heavily, that will paradoxically lead to better ridership, but not an increased revenue.
The three biggest reasons that we can see this happening is a large percentage of our ridership is with Western. That's not a dollar per ride. We have more and more people that are using reduced passes and they're using them more often. So our social and health agencies are, their percentages going up. And then the types of free passes that we have a lot of different types of free passes.
And those are all policy choices that we endorse.
Correct.
So we are driving this partly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You, all right. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about fares today. I don't know how acclimated you are to our fare structure. We have been really accommodating over the years, and so we've been trying to solve different problems with a one-off approach. And so now you started out with this small house and we built on all these rooms, and so we have kind of a complicated fare structure that we'll outline just shortly. All right, these are our regular fares. Single ride local is $1, our ADX down to Skagit, and then all the different kinds of passes that we offer. Over on the right-hand side, you can see we take cash, we have paper tickets, you can have an UMO card, the physical card, or on your phone. We have day passes that are magnetic. It doesn't list all of the kind of college passes that we have, but these are the basics right over here on the right. Let me just talk about stored value for a minute. Stored value means there's money loaded onto your transit card, like a prepaid balance. Every time you ride, the fare is subtracted off, and it knows if you're a full rate rider at $1 or a reduced rate rider at 50 cents. It also fare caps, so after you ride 3 times a day, so that'd be $3 for a regular rider or $1.50 for a reduced rider, the rest of your trips that day are free. It works the same for a calendar month. So once you take 30 rides in a month, the rest of your rides are free. And what Michael was saying earlier is some people are using either stored value or those passes, a lot of whom are purchased for them to ride many, many times. And so that's part of why we're seeing that line separate. These are, these are different reduced fares. They're generally half off, some a little more. But these are all the different kinds of fare that we offer that are reduced.
And I might mention, some of these are required by some of the grants we get, that we offer a reduced fare to certain groups. So we have some limitations on what we can do there.
Right. We are part of a 16 group agency in the Puget Sound called the Regional Reduced Fare Program. And so anyone who has one of those regional reduced cards that they've gotten at any of these agencies, it's good for half off fare amongst individuals.
The question was, there's so many different classifications here. Is it required by law, or can we just collapse them, call it student, and just have all students under one category?
You can, so a lot of this is policy available to us.
The first 3 are required, the rest are our choice.
Okay.
And then these are our free fare types. So youth 18, and they're listed mostly in order of how often they're used. So youth 18 and under would be our largest, our 50,000 6-ride passes, about 175, that would be 300,000 rides, right? So about 175,000 of those a year are taken. Courtesy rides is when somebody gets on the bus and they either don't have fare or they have a card that hasn't been reloaded yet, so it taps a negative. Generally, those people are still riding on the bus, so courtesy rides. Free on fixed route means any paratransit eligible rider can ride for free on fixed route with their PCA if they're eligible for a PCA. A PCA, yes, good question, is a personal care assistant. The reason that this was implemented was to try to pull some rides away from paratransit for people who could ride a little bit of both. So maybe they're paratransit eligible, but they could take some of their rides on fixed route. We were trying to incentivize that. We go a little above and beyond with our gold card. 75 plus is free here in Whatcom County, and other places at 65 plus. So you can kind of see.
Any of those required by law?
Well, the first,
The PCAs are required by ADA law, so we're required to provide free rides for anyone who's a personal care assistant.
And then youth 18 and under is part of our Washington funding.
And the employees, dependents, retired spouses, that's part of our CBA.
What smart trips can we have a count, or if it's category, I know that we support that and we distribute these passes. Is it when they ride, can you track and how many people have been using that?
It's a little hard to get a number, but I will
Yeah.
tell you there's two pieces to it. There are 6 ride tickets for when they're trying to promote the program, and then there are free 31-day passes for the first month of people who have registered into the program. So,
Kind of more promotional product.
it's more, that's right.
Okay.
So I know that youth under 18 is a new, relatively new. How many of these were here 5 years ago under the free fares? Most,
Oh,
all.
on the youth, I'll say we had 17 and under, state law just bumped it up one.
Yeah, all of these have been here since we made the major changes in 2013. We increased the 50,000 6 ride passes is the one that's Charlie changed the most. It started out as 30,000 day passes, and then it morphed into well, prior to 2013, it was 30,000 single ride tokens, and then it merged into 30,000 day passes, and then it merged into the 30,000 6 ride passes, and then it increased to 50,000 because there was demand. So that's probably the one that's changed the most over the years.
I think something you asked of how we can make a determination. Is there a number you can place of revenue in the first category, second and third? Third means what we could have gotten. Second is also what we could have gotten. The first one is what, that's where gross revenue is coming.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, so if you can say, okay, 80% of our revenue is coming in category 1 or only 50%, but we're losing, it could have been possible in the second and third category. That can allows us to rethink where we can make adjustments. Yep. Okay.
This is another status quo slide that I thought you might be interested in, where our fare revenues are today. So this is for our revenue, not ridership. So 38% of our revenue is coming from Western. Cash fare, 21% of our revenue comes from cash, but 30%, just over 30% of our riders pay cash. Day passes. Stored value is one that's interesting and is on the rise. It's something that we've only offered for a few years. It was 3% in 2023, 9% last year, and it's going to be about double that this year. Stored value is very popular. People are really understanding the comment. I will tell you the number one request we get around fare is people would like to have open payment or be able to tap a credit card on the bus. And I think this is a mindset shift toward that with stored value. All right, let's talk a little bit about fare free. So option number 2, we listed it right after COVID, and we want to talk to you all about that again. So some of the opportunities with going fare free is lower barriers to ride on the bus. You can just get on the bus without having to purchase a fare and the things that are involved with that. Faster boarding. In some cases, it can reduce dwell time. And we do find that traffic impacts us quite a bit, even more than dwell time, but it is a factor. Operator safety, lower disputes at the fare box. That is one of the higher pain points for operators when they're not fare enforcers, but asking for fares, operator safety, and then lower administration costs for fare collection equipment, armored trucks, all of that kind of thing. And then on the other side, the risk if we went fare free was the loss of revenue. We have about 1.7 million in revenue, and it costs us just over $500,000 to collect that revenue. Potential federal funding risk in our current administration, they prioritize a user pay model. Loss of ridership data. With APCs working properly, we might know how many people, but what we're losing with fare box ridership data is who's boarding the bus, what kind of fare they're paying. And so that is an important piece of data that we would lose. Passenger safety is another, as so many agencies went fare free and then are starting to move back toward fare collection. They're finding that while it's safer for operators to be fare free, about 38% less assaults if you go fare free. There's about there's been several studies that have shown up to 200% increase in passenger on passenger assaults.
Go ahead.
So it costs $500,000 to collect $1.7 million.
Correct.
So that's where I was going, that, you know, if we choose the free fare, two things. How much can we double our ridership? Like, what I mean is, the benefits of this whole agency is public convenience, helping people always, right? So is it the fares which is reducing our ridership? If we do free fares and we increase by 5% the ridership, then it's not worth it. You know, like, the other part is, if something is free, it loses its value. People don't really perceive it, it's a service or, oh, you know, it's just there, right? So, but if can indicate that what would impact would be, it will increase the ridership by 25%, because then we are getting some value. May not be dollars, but this is why we are spending. We are trying to have only $1 million, right? Yeah. Out of $55 million annual budget, right?
Giving us some revenue versus.
Yeah, so foregoing $1 million, if we can increase it by 25-30%, then we have gotten that value back.
We're working to come up with those numbers, and hopefully we'll have them in August. Okay, I will caution, one of the things that we're finding is that there's a significant portion of our ridership, who, again, is paid for by a third party. And so we're not sure we're trying to factor that in. And some of the models that we look at, like some of the other agencies that have gone fare free, they don't necessarily have the same ratio. And so it makes it kind of tricky to guesstimate that, but yeah, we're working.
Okay, Mike.
I want to approach Sat Paul's observation from the other way around. I think part of what Sat Paul was asking is how much is the fare we're currently charging holding back ridership, such that if we got rid of the fare, people would ride. The other way is saying, well, what are the reasons people don't ride? How often they say, oh, I don't use a bus because it's so expensive, right? I can't afford it. I think that's like almost never the answer. So what that indicates is the fare we're charging is not holding back ridership, or very little ridership, and the only people whose ridership might hold back, we're probably already catching that with reduced or free. So I don't think we'll see ridership go up. That won't be one of the benefits of going to fare free.
One of the things we'll be exploring with some of these other options I'll get to is the question of, they might not say I can't afford it, but maybe they say I don't know how to buy a pass, or I don't know how to get to a product, or I don't know the complexity of getting onto it. So that's one of the reasons that we're exploring the rider experience as part of this, to see if that's a potential barrier to ridership, and if there's something we can do about that. So
I love that, Josh, because it is ease and convenience. If someone loaded an app on my phone for me, as opposed to I got to figure out how to do it, and that's what's happening with students. Someone's doing it for them. So the psychology of ridership, the psychology of convenience, the psychology, and that the convenience also goes to, you know, moving to more frequent service, right? The way we can increase ridership one way is, I don't think it's necessarily take away the fare, but to make the fare experience easier, automatic, thought-free.
I was gonna approach it a little, another way is like, the people we want to get on the bus are in their cars. How much, obviously, if we go to zero, they're gonna take their car. But how much would you have to pay them to get out of their car? Would they get out of their car for $2, $3, $4, $5? I mean,
15.
At some point, they will take the bus. My point is that those are the people we're after, and the only way you're gonna get them out of the car is some major change in how they approach the bus.
I'll get out of my car if you can get me to where I need to go in Bellingham in under
Less than 2 hours.
2 hours.
And that's what you're.
Time is worth money. I mean, that's a big factor
Right.
too.
So paradoxically, fare is one of the smaller levers.
And we'll talk, sorry, I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but in August, I'll be able to show you kind of the fare recovery ratio, but in a lot of ways, fares is like it's just a small portion of what actually goes into that recovery ratio. Your cost of operating is a huge portion of that. So adding a trip can drive up the cost of one side and not actually generate that much revenue on the other side. So it's really more interesting thinking about what percentage of revenue do you want your fares to be. And I think it is the fare recovery ratio, because it has those complexities. And it demonstrates, I think fare recovery ratio demonstrates how little lever fare revenue.
So how big is the barrier of us issuing a card or preloaded card and everything, but having a regular credit card? Because with this new technologies and chips and things, because that eliminates a lot of infrastructure doing on our part. I mean, that's how the coffee shops are making money, you know. Dollar stores are making money because you buy only $5, $7 worth of items, you flash your card and go away, right? We'd rather eat the provider fees, right? The credit card fees. We'd rather eat those, right? And or pay for them, but make it convenient, it's totally worth it. I think that it's the technology barrier. It makes a long line because card takes 20, 30 seconds to click, yes.
And so that's what we'll be proposing in our fourth option.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I'll already move to the fourth option.
I think it's important for you to understand that we don't compare and contrast this fare free. And this discussion we just had is so critical. Because I think we're seeing, that discussion is occurring in the community as well.
Other component of that too is the ease of just tapping a
Yeah.
credit card, where you don't have to think like, where am I going?
Yeah.
I mean, living in
My
Bellingham,
bank card
I
or
can-
my.
I can take the bus pretty much anywhere, but if like I can't find my UMO code to put into my app, I might look for $1.
Yeah.
I can't find $1.
Yeah.
I'll take the card because that's just too much time. If I could just use my debit card and tap it.
I mean, what if
So
we
that-
mailed every resident a QR code and said, scan this code, activate your UMO, you're now free to go on the bus, and you'll just debit whatever credit card you put in. Every resident now is equivalent to a Western student.
Or just get a card reader.
Yeah, but people like me don't know what QR code is.
Well, I have to say with a different perspective, having worked with and having, worked with the travel trainer at the senior center to get 15 senior citizens on the bus that had not been on the bus before. A QR code is not going to be the answer, and even an app might not be the answer. They like a card. They like something in their wallet that they can pull out. They keep it in the second slot in their purse and
Right, no.
pull it out every
Rob,
time.
do you think
it's
a
loud.
credit card would meet that if they have?
I think
Or a
if,
debit
yeah,
card
I
or
mean, I
something.
think too, yeah, just the card as opposed to a phone. I mean, my parents are 72 and 73, and my son regularly goes over there to update their phones from the mistakes that they've made with them, so.
And we agree, we think a stored value card is an important part of the solution. And I'll just mention, we estimate about 60% of our riders are paid for by a third party or through a third party transaction. And having so those aren't people that are gonna be reaching for a credit card because somebody else is already paying the bill. They're gonna be reaching for a card or an app, or something like that, or another party loaded value or product on it. So we think there needs to be a good mix of options.
I just want to share something with you. I was in India a year and a half ago. The federal government came up with this system, payment system, QR code and up to say $500. Like, you can go anywhere, any vendor, anything. There will be no bank fee and there will be no provider fee, period. It's just like that. It has brought in 500 million people who were using cash. They all have a card. It's on the cell phone now or on the thing. I mean, that kind of revolution is needed.
It is, Audra and I were at a present, I think Leslie listened to it, that I thought it was really interesting. They're talking about the rest of the world, banking doesn't have the huge fees and the overhead and cost that it does here in the United States. And so a lot of solutions that might work in Europe or India we can't do here.
We can't
We
do
have a
here.
huge percentage of cash users, 30% of us not understand because of the challenges of our banking system.
The guy is selling eggs on the sidewalk. He just has a little QR card here and he's selling eggs and don't have to deal with cash.
We take Venmo.
So fun.
It seems like we skipped option 4.
We'll get to
Well,
it.
Let's roll ahead.
Kind of combining them, so
Yeah, and
let's move on through.
before we move away from, I just want to emphasize passenger safety. There's risk for fare-free passenger safety. Not worth doing.
We're looking at that as, compared to
Yeah.
operator safety, so,
Yeah.
you know.
So I'm not hearing a whole lot of fare-free discussion, positive here, so.
What I heard you say earlier in the context of the passenger safety was other agencies are moving back to a fare system.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are the other reasons why they're doing
Revenue, like they're,
it? So it's, that's
right, they're having to cut staff, they're having to cut routes, and so that's the piece of this that is, I haven't mentioned yet, is it's difficult to return to a user-free model once you've been fare-free. Examples are Kansas City, BART, WMATA in DC, MDPA in Boston, people who are trying to go back to fare, and they're having an opportunity to totally re-envision their fare system, but there's also some pain points with that.
I would say we experienced some of that returning to, from collecting, being fare free during COVID. I think we've had,
Boston right here.
we anticipate that if we're gonna implement one of these other models, that we almost have to retrain the community and even the organization that we are a fare collecting organization. And so we did put back up the fare boxes and uncovered them and stuff like that. But there's still this lingering expectation that we're fare free that developed during COVID. So that's impacting, I think, that graph that you saw earlier as well.
Watching closely what's happening in King County, they were only collecting about half of their fare, and so 6 or 8 weeks ago, they started with fare enforcement officers. They're out in teams and they're doing a variety of things to try to enforce fare. They have stickers on the doors that say pay fare here. They have a structure of if you get ticketed and you can't pay it, but they're really driving that point of we're a fare collecting agents.
There's, as we'll talk more about this in the future, there are pros and cons to all these things. So fare enforcement at scale for King County is much different than for fare enforcement for WTA. Like, who's going to ticket? Who's going to enforce the ticket? Who's going to hear the tickets? All those kinds of things that go into, which is very different at scale for King County than us. So there's many things we're going to have to talk through on pros and cons for all these.
Well, that's one thing that reminds me of. I remember during the COVID downturn, agencies across the country all lost their fare box revenue and had to exist on their others. And for us, that was a relatively small loss. For King County, I understand, they had a much larger chunk, 25% was fare box. So paradoxically, in agencies that serve dense areas and have high ridership per bus, right? Successful urban agencies were the ones who are most hurt and are most unable to consider going fare free. And paradoxically, because we have kind of low ridership compared to Seattle, we at least have the option. It's within the range of feasibility for us to consider keeping the fare nominal, which I think I call it nominal now, or even below nominal.
I think you'll see that too. It's just in that range of agencies. So you have like Island Transit, which is fare free, or Lewis County Transit. There's much smaller agencies where their cost to collect the fares would easily exceed the cost to that they would get out revenue. And so you kind of have that scale of agency size, and we're right there where we get to choose. Yeah.
We had like Olympia that actually shrunk their service area, increased the tax rate, went fare free. So there's variety.
They shifted to a more Seattle type model and away from our mixed rural urban models.
Yeah, but then drop fares at the same time.
Yeah, got rid of fares, but then
tax
the
increase.
voters voted in a tax increase to pay for that fare free and a shorter area. So there's a variety of models around.
We do have just not like have at Western.
Yeah.
I'm only half kidding. Seriously. But do we have input from the?
Kidding, but
I'm very much only half kidding on that. Do we have input on the drivers on this? Like the dangers of not collecting fares? Are they?
I know what I hear, but I'm gonna turn this to Eric.
Well, we actually haven't had a lot of the conversation recently with the operators because we kind of deferred this conversation. The overwhelming response initially was there was concerns around not collecting fare. The sort of natural barrier that fare presents or having fare presents to individuals riding the bus. This was also during COVID where there was a lot of other concerning behavior that we were seeing in the community. And so those two things kind of got intertwined a little bit. And so I don't think I have a fair representation of what that work group would say right now. But at the time, they were over.
2 years ago,
They were
not
against it.
for it. Yeah. I don't know whether that's changed. I think, you notice we're past our, I mean, this is a great discussion, so I don't want to, but there will be more time. We also have.
Okay, I think we move through.
Yeah, we can move through the other two, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you, Andrea. So the third option would be to kind of leave our system as is, but then raise the cost of each of those fare products. So the cost of a trip, the cost of period pass, all of those would go up. And this would increase our net revenue. It would increase those fares on both our fixed route and our paratransit services. We'd increase, of course, our revenue per ride. And this is a pretty straightforward implementation. This we can roll out pretty quickly. We just take our rates menu and increase them. We'll take this opportunity to make a few minor improvements, maybe reduce a couple of things that were on that giant list of stuff, things that aren't really used very much effectively. But we also note that this doesn't really reduce the complexity of the system and doesn't ease any of the pain points on our current system so much. And it doesn't reduce our cost of operating our current system. So that'll stay kind of the same. The 500,000 that we talked about doesn't change with this sort of approach. As we discussed with Fare Free and with any increase in fares, there is a possible reduction in ridership. Understand that. Oh yeah, and I think it's worth noting, Audrey, I think it's worth noting that we haven't raised our base fare of $1 a ride since 2008. So that's stayed rather consistent. We have played at times with the bus pass fare. So we increased the cost of a bus pass, but kept the dollar same.
I was going to suggest another way to look at it is rather than increasing fares, call it reducing discounts.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you know, if we leave the base fare same, because that's why when initially you gave us 1, 2, 3 categories, we need to see what are we leaving it on the table.
Yeah, and I would say that's what we did when we increased the price of the period passes, because we reduced the discount. So for a frequent rider, now they're paying a higher percentage. So if somebody were to ride 30 trips or 35 trips paying $1 cash each time, they're paying $5 more than the person that was able to pony up $30 at the beginning of the month to pay for a period pass, right? So you have some interesting equity issues with period passes. And what we're talking about when we change the price of period pass is essentially reducing changing the discount, because the period passes are intended to be a discount against a cash fare. In this case, we would probably raise both the base dollar per ride to something else, as well as the period pass.
Just share with you, we have a small ferry. 1,100 residents live there, right? Our fare collection is $1.8 million. And this is the toughest thing, this is the most toughest thing I'm facing, setting the fares.
And it collects 45% of the operating budget.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's why, right? So.
It's a lot more than $1.
Yeah, so like option 3, our fourth option would also seek to raise our net revenue with fare increases. But we would be simplifying our fare options instead of all these period passes and things like that to a simple pay per trip model. However, in place of the period pass, we would continue to use the fare capping that we do with our current stored value system, where we fare cap at a day and at a month, a calendar month. And that provides some predictability, some max dollars that you're going to pay as a frequent rider, while at the same time providing some equity, because everybody's paying the same per trip right up until they hit that max there. This would raise our rates for fixed route and paratransit across the board. And we would combine our fare collection platform across fixed route and paratransit. We have a number of riders who ride both systems. And their fare options today are actually split. So you have a period pass for paratransit. And actually you're free on fixed route on fixed route. So there's some things there, but the systems are different. In this option, we would add support for paying by credit card or smart wallet, or bank card essentially, debit bank cards. And in this one, we would significantly invest in reimagining our partnerships for this new pay-per-trip model. Most of our partnerships are built around a period pass model. In this case, we would reimagine those around a pay-per-trip model. And this would assist with some of the equitable access.
Why wouldn't you just raise the rates you're recharging for the partnerships rather than going to a pay per trip model?
Number one.
Yeah. I think with the pay per trip, so if you think about it like a partnership period pass, they're paying X number of dollars for, so like Whatcom Community College is a great example. They're paying, they pay 50 cents a trip, so I guess that's not really a good example. The city of Bellingham would be a good, city of Bellingham staff would be a good example. So city of Bellingham staff, they allow staff to buy a period pass from us at $30. So a regular rate period pass, they buy that. So now they're going to have to pay per trip. So now, how do they do that, right? Do they put money, does the city put money onto a stored value card and do that? Or do they end up just dumping that back on the individual if we eliminate period pass? I think there's some opportunities to then reimagine that, because right now they're just buying that $30 period pass for each employee who really wants to ride the bus, okay? But now if we move to a pay per trip model with capping, the city could potentially load a bus pass on every employee. And some of those employees are gonna ride once a month, 0 times a month, 3 times a month, but the product's still there. That employee rides 4 times a month, the city owes $4 or whatever the rate is per trip. And so then you end up, and you look at the total value that your now city is paying WTA, for example, in this per trip model, the dollar doesn't expand exponentially like it would if it was period passes, right? So period passes, you have each person you add, you got to buy another period pass for. In this case, you're adding somebody who may or may not be riding the full maximum of the trips at the capping level. And so you can get a lot more people participating in those infrequent trips by having a product right there, and the actual dollar cost doesn't radically change for the agency. And so that's a third party payer model that's possible with a pay per trip model that's really not practical on a period pass.
So the user's not paying per trip, it's the partner.
Pool, right? So you're kind of doing these pooled pay models with a third party payer model. So that's one idea that we have, and one option in revisiting our partnership.
Because the employer only pays for actual use, and even that's capped if they have a few star employees who use it a lot.
Yep. So we think there's some exciting options on with partnerships on the third payer models where you can do some of these pooled things.
Sorry, we're
Way behind.
almost 20 minutes over. So
Okay.
if we could just go to what's next.
Yeah. So we'll jump ahead to what's next. As we mentioned, so we'll have further discussion in July 17th meeting. We'll be diving, hopefully having a little longer time in August 7th board workshop to dive in further, where we'll also be presenting the financial models for these options. Our goal is to have this board select 1 or 2 preferred options coming out of the August 7th workshop, so that we can then put those out to public comment, have some public meetings, key stakeholder engagement, bringing that stuff back in September, and hopefully reaching a decision, a strategy decision from this board in October, so we can be implementing in 2026. Thank you.
All right. We have a lot of good questions from you all. As you are thinking about this, please shoot them to me and we'll have answers in July.
Got you.
Yeah, side conversations are now being recorded.
Sign waivers when we come in here.
Yeah.
They'll be recorded.
There's a lot of money in making sure.
Here we go.
Okay, Vicky.
Here we go.
Coming.
We're
Just
starting
getting some
back
more
up.
coffee.
Oh, yeah, no, I was talking to the folks out of the office. You're at least in the room.
Oh, I think the meeting's starting.
Why don't we put count pictures on our current book?
Maybe so.
Okay, so this next section, is, about service, again, building towards August. As you would recall, at the last workshop, Ben gave us an outstanding, presentation on paratransit. There were a few things that, board members asked questions on that Ben kindly, revised to come back and talk about, and then Eric will talk, quickly about, our fixed route system, just to give kind of the lay of the land refresher. So with that, Ben, thanks for coming back.
So just to remind everyone, what we talked about in paratransit service last time, we talked by starting with the idea that we had this 3/4 mile corridor seen in the green areas as well as up by Birch Bay Lane, and that service times are based on our fixed route schedule. So returning to that idea that the fixed route schedule is very connected to paratransit intrinsically. Some of our key discussion points that we talked about last time. One, we measure paratransit efficiency using two metrics mainly, which are on-time performance and productivity. On-time performance is purely what percentage of our trips do we deliver on time, and productivity is their riders per revenue hour. That also includes personal care attendance and escorts. Talked about increases in county ridership. We've seen that in Birch Bay Plain as well as other areas in the county. We talked about how those trends are impacting our ability to achieve high efficiency as an agency in paratransit. And lastly, we talked about how revenue hours and miles are higher than ever before, despite ridership still being below pre-COVID figures. So how revenue miles really are outgrowing as far as growth rate goes of our ridership. But last time I talked about those items in connection as well as separate, but I showed them separately in visualization. So we showed ridership trends and we showed revenue mile trends. The first request that you all had was to pull those together on one chart. This is the revenue miles growth versus ridership growth. So talking about that combination between them. So this is revenue miles per passenger, which is the line that we're looking at right now. So basically we're taking our total revenue miles in paratransit, which includes not only the miles that we have a rider on the bus, but miles that we are deadheading to and from other picks and drops. Then we're dividing that by our total passengers per year. So this is since 2015 till 2024, we see that we have consistently increased the amount of revenue miles that we are driving per passenger. And this is really the main metric that we can that is driving disbursement between ridership and our high revenue miles. So this metric is showing that even though our ridership is about 85% of what it was pre-COVID, we are doing way more revenue miles and hours than before. Any questions on kind of that relationship?
Is it because of the expansion of the cities and more population from areas?
Yes, it is. So we are seeing higher county ridership in all across the county, specifically when we expanded our ADA corridor to Birch Bay Plain. We've seen an increase in 80,000 revenue miles last year for that area alone. So that's the main driving factor, but we are seeing growth across the county.
Is it because we have to send a bus from here? Is it possible that you have bus or your drivers sitting in plane itself?
So it's very
Anyways,
determinant.
continue.
It's okay. It's very dependent on rider demands. That's one of the hardest things about paratransit is that it's completely determinant on where a rider wants to go. So if a rider wants to go from Blaine to Linden, we just have to honor that rider. The second thing that you all requested was to have some idea of what our single occupancy trips are like, and what percentage of our total paratransit trips count as single occupancy. The definition that I used for this is a direct origin to destination trip with only the rider on board. If they have a PCA or escort, that also is still counted as a single occupancy trip as far as this goes. So a couple points I want to point out here on the timeline. During COVID, we purposely tried to do single occupancy trips for the health and safety of our riders. So you'll see that that's why that spike is up there. And then as we have returned out of COVID times, that number has started to trend down. But wanted to also point out the Birch Bay Plain expansion here, so that when that was consistently trending down until that point, and although there is little ups and downs, it seems like we've kind of plateaued around this middle 45%, which is about 10% higher than it used to be pre-COVID. So a couple things I want to mention regarding that. One, specifically is distance. When we have higher county ridership, it's a lot harder to have grouped trips because of the lower demand and higher distance of those county trips. So if I have one rider going from Birch Bay to Linden, another rider going from Linden to Ferndale, there's a very low likelihood of those riders being able to be grouped with anyone else going in that exact same direction at the exact same time. So that's one contribution to why we have this gap in a single occupancy.
When you say exact same time, how much window of exact, is there a half an hour or an hour that you try to group them, or what is your maximum window of close enough?
So it's very dependent on the trip type. So that's why I was also gonna say the other reason about this difference is that we have new trip types than before, and those were introduced in 2023. So before had these two windows per ADA, which was an hour and a half, depending on the length of the trip. That has changed now in 2023. Per ADA requirements, we now have two trip types. One that's based on an appointment time. So we are required to get you to a destination by a certain time. Then we have a pickup window trip type, which is we will pick you up within these 30 minutes, but there's no guarantee about when you're going to get to your destination. So by having those two different types, it's made it a lot harder to group ride because you might have two people going in the same direction, but one has a very specific pickup time and one has a very specific destination time. So that's made it a lot harder for us to group them, even if they are in a efficient path of travel. They might have late metrics that we have to meet for on-time performance standards that allow us to not group them, or that don't allow us to group those trips anymore.
That pickup window is like an hour, right, for appointments?
So
Like between 8:15 and 9:15, something like that.
the pickup window is 30 minutes, so it's a 30-minute window for the pickup type. So we say we will be here between 8 and 8:30 if you want to have a specific time of when you're picked up. If you want to get to an appointment by a specific time for like a doctor's appointment, that's based on the distance and travel time of the trip, actually. Our system has various exponential categories for how long that window is. So those are to simulate what a comparable fixed route trip would be. They're called max onboard time factors, how they're calculated. So for example, if the origin destination of the trip is 10 minutes from each other, we might have an hour window to complete that trip. But if they are 50 minutes from each other, that window expands to 2 hours.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I raised the point that is it possible to designate days in a week to an area, or even twice in a week or 3 times in a week? That is that, then people can schedule their lives also along with yours, but you meet the efficiency and on-time requirement. Is that possible, or?
So we do that in zone service.
Okay.
Are you gonna cover zone service?
Sure. I can, but so at its core, our ADA paratransit service is, it's up here, it's those green corridors.
Sure.
That is everywhere that we run a fixed route service, we have this 3/4 of a mile, everywhere and like all the time. So we can't say in those green corridors, this is a green corridor for Tuesday, this is a green corridor for Thursday. Anytime we're running fixed route, we have this ADA complimentary paratransit service obligated by the ADA. So the short answer is no, we can't restrict it in that way. We do provide other service to the rest of the county, and that's those large sections of purple and blue,
Yep.
where it's either once or twice a week where we're providing on-demand service. That's general public. You don't have to be ADA eligible in those areas. That's just, we're providing, everybody in Whatcom County pays into our system, into the PTVA. So we provide a level of service to everyone in Whatcom County through that, with the exception of the folks that live up in Baker's area, which is great. I love them.
Any other questions on single occupancy? The third request that you had was when we started talking about on-time performance, you were curious about out of our late trips, what degree of lateness were we? So this shows that we really were not very late out of those late trips. Most of the time, we are really close to the degree of the time that we were required to get someone to their destination on time. So two metrics I wanted to point out were that 92% of our late trips are less than 15 minutes late. So the majority of them really fall into within 15 minutes of their required destination or pickup window. And then our average minutes late is just 4 minutes late. So that is a number that I think we should be pretty proud of from a ridership experience standpoint. And even 60% is between that 0 and 5 minutes after our late window.
Can I ask you a question? Let's say I had a 2 o'clock doctor's appointment. And I call to schedule that. If I try to request a 2 o'clock arrival time, would you say, no, we're gonna actually schedule a 1:45 arrival time? And do we build in, and do we request the riders build in their own cushion? So 4 minutes is consequential in that case.
Yes, we do definitely teach the riders, especially when it comes to medical appointments. We have our CSRs suggest that you book 15 minutes before your actual appointment time. It is up to the rider. Some riders, say they want to risk it, but we do a lot of rider education for that. This is a public transit service and it's not a guaranteed time. And the last thing that you requested was to understand where our paratransit riders are going. I think this is a really great analysis from an economic impact perspective of how paratransit is contributing to our community here in Whatcom County. We have redone our bins of locations since we last talked in March. So these are our various bins of where our paratransit riders are going to for common locations. So for this chart specifically, I pulled out single addresses or residential addresses. So these are all common locations that riders are going to. And as you can see, the real main category here is healthcare. So we've done about 80,000 rides so far this year. About 40,000 of those are to a common location, and the rest are to returning home, which we'll look at in just a second here. So yeah, our main categories are healthcare, grocery stores, churches, community centers, miscellaneous stores is any store that doesn't have any grocery part attached to it. Social services and support. Any questions about where our paratransit riders are going to?
How many are helpful to get these slides, by the way?
How many are home, resident to resident? Are there any paratransit that people go from one house to another house?
Oh, yes, quite a few. So I did.
That's not in this chart.
And that's not in this chart, it's in the next slide. This is the residential pie chart, so you can see that most of our trips for residential, what we consider residential as the unknown category, that may include some unnamed locations that we don't have stored in our system, but most of the time that's just single address homes that people are living or going to. And then the rest is residential communities, so apartment complexes, mobile home parks, like that, and then assisted living and skilled nursing facilities.
So the large gray areas like individual addresses.
Yes, yep, anything that we don't have saved in our system.
Okay.
So go back, this is the 9,000 miles, 40 goes almost the same.
Yes, so the reason for that is most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, our riders are going somewhere and then they're coming home. We always, or most of the time, have a return trip, so that's why those are basically even. Sometimes there might be a 3-leg trip, but that's why they come out to be mostly even. And I think in the interest of time, I'll let Eric continue, but if you would like, There's also a video of kind of how this is visualized.
Oh, man.
In our,
I like that.
Yeah, play with Legos.
And the color coding has to do with type of destination.
Yes, it
It's like the
does.
red on like grocery stores to me.
Yeah, so there'll be some further slides about breaking them out, but so this is all just this year also, I want to point out. So we've been to 2,100 unique locations just this year. So we could talk about some of our highest areas per type. So you can see the like kidney center there for grocery stores. You point out Fred Meyer and Winco, Walmart. Home. This is Max Higby, Bellingham Senior Center. You see the senior centers in Linden and Bellingham as well as lots of different churches, lots of different restaurants and recreation where we include gyms and parks in this. So WCA, Aquatic Center, lots of opportunities and support following our mission here at WTA. And then all of the living communities. And then I think probably the biggest surprise here after this slide is our other, which really just fills our entire.
This is fast.
That's great.
So we had this discussion for a while about microtransit, right? Is there any more information on that? Other agencies, other people doing it? Is it successful? Is it reduces costs?
Yeah. I think I would pass that over to Tim.
I would just say there's no new work done on that, but we're gonna see a scenario later on in the service allocation that allows a discussion about what microtransit, how that affects the maximized ridership provide coverage aspect of it.
Yeah, because half of the trips are people to unknown addresses. It could be in the same city, going, visiting family, visiting friends or other places, right? And that microtransit help that.
Clarification though, the unknown addresses, was that primarily the return trip from the grocery store or the medical appointment?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's the return trip, it's not necessarily a new trip. That's why it's even, it's
even.
like 40,000 trips going
Yeah,
into
you're going to grocery store, coming back home is unknown.
Yes.
But they are necessarily two different trips. That's not one trip counted.
And these are paratransit eligible people,
That's
so
why
they may not be
it's-
able to ride some of the Lyft.
Yes.
We have any idea how often people are having to transfer out there? That was the thing I didn't even know happened until recently.
Could you define what you mean by transfer?
So, we had a client who wanted to go from Custer to actually just around the corner. And was told that he would have to get dropped off at the Cordata station and wait for another vehicle.
So that's a mix of that zone service area that's not our ADA corridor. That's operating on those once or twice a week. And so the way that works is we'll go out, we'll get you, and then we'll bring you to a centralized location. So that's somebody that doesn't have paratransit service at their home location, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And then they're coming into Cordata where then our paratransit service is meeting them there to then give them the ADA paratransit service to whatever location they're going to because.
Or fixed route.
Or fixed route,
Yeah.
yeah, so. That doesn't happen too often. Our zone trips are pretty.
These data are blowing my mind.
That was making me dizzy.
Because. Now what I want is I wish every other writer would tell us why they're going someplace, where they're going to. Because this is a huge, as I said, case in value and what we're actually providing.
Yeah.
Not a trip, but a purpose.
Yeah.
And we can't assume that our paratransit riders are the same as everybody else. We also can't assume they're very different from everybody else. I would love to have this data for the ridership in general, because that would make a huge case for what we're actually doing for the community.
Well, let me tell you, we actually are going to do a passenger survey come this October, which will hopefully have, I'm not sure we're gonna get this much data, but we will have data on trip purpose,
I
right?
love how this is presented too,
Yeah.
because I'm seeing many things at the same time. And we are, our service is by nature physical and geographic. And so to see that physical and geographic with the purpose, and I just love this presentation.
It's taking us to a new level.
I don't know if it would be possible, but it would be really interesting to know how many of these strips are to work. Like, that would be much harder.
Definitely an important distinction.
That would be much harder. to
Categorized by
navigate.
location type, not necessarily purpose. We
Right.
have people going to stores that are working there.
Yeah.
So you always do a survey as well, but for the most part, I think make some large assumptions based on location type.
And that is not currently information that we ask of our riders in paratransit.
That's how I think of relation to work. Usually, so.
So I just want to thank Ben.
Yeah.
You can see he's put a lot of time and energy into this, which has really helped with being able to look at
The visuals made Michael happy.
And Todd,
Yeah.
well, this goal.
Yes, it's really the goal.
Very impressive.
He used to spin a little faster, and Eric said, you gotta. spin that."
I felt the same thing, I was like, whoa, get me off this ride.
So if you don't mind, and Eric, I'm sorry, due to time constraints, we want to make sure we have enough time for the service allocation. Would you be okay if we skip through the fixed route overview and move?
Just a minute. Eric, do you have those thingies like he had?
I do not.
He does
No.
not.
Okay, skip it.
I knew following Ben was gonna be a hard time anyway.
Pretty much anybody following Ben has a hard time.
It's gonna be a brownish for Becca Brown.
Okay, so then if you're okay, we'll move on in with thanks to Ben. And we'll move on into the service allocation framework. And I'll ask Tim and Maureen and Hayden to come on up.
So can we get those presentations sent
Yeah,
to
we'll
us?
get those.
That way,
Yeah,
we know where your son are.
yeah, Ben will send those to Vicky and Vicky will get those out to everybody.
Does there have slides that can be sent?
I do not, but I'll put something together.
Just his brainwaves.
It can rotate.
So the first part of the service allocation, obviously, is to continue the conversation from last time. You can see how the ramifications of this discussion play out. First part of this, Hayden is gonna talk through, he's been working on the comp plan and the implications of the comp plan, EIS on WTA. And so we wanted to touch on that, not just from you as WTA board members, but also as you're going back and thinking about things and the tie between transit, land use planning and zoning and populations, those kinds of things. So I rambled on while everybody came up, so Hayden, over to you.
Great, thank you. And thanks for having me, everyone. For the record, Hayden Richardson, Transportation and Land Use Planner with WTA. So as Les mentioned, this is just to give a little bit of context into information that you all have probably seen in your day-to-day life as an elected official for a local jurisdiction. Just to provide that context in how it affects transit facilities as well and how transit can affect the built environment. So Rochelle, if you could go to the next slide, please. So again, you are all probably aware of this process, but just to give kind of the background and context, the comprehensive plan process, we're in a current periodic review. It's an update based on additional GMA growth management requirements that have happened over the past 10 years. So the process is to identify 4 different alternatives that go through the process. And right now, it's currently being evaluated in the draft environmental impact statement process, which is the environmental review. And then after the environmental review and comments are evaluated, a preferred alternative is selected, and then each local jurisdiction adopts those growth projections into each chapter of the comprehensive plans. Next slide, please. So just in general, this is the overall county population projections. This is done using Office of Financial Management, which is a state office projections. You can see there the gray bar is kind of the middle projection, and it goes as high as 337,000 and as low as 258,000. Now, with Whatcom County's process, they used Leland Consulting to kind of refine those boundaries into the lighter colored green area, which is 321,000 and 274,000, just to kind of narrow that scope of view. Next slide, please. So I mentioned there were 4 different alternatives that are being evaluated currently. One is no action alternative. I'll just kind of rattle through these pretty quickly. Alternative 1 is the lowest overall rate of growth, which is the kind of the middle range of the population projections. Alternative 2, which we're going to focus on mostly today, is what the county's been calling the multi-jurisdictional resolution. And so all local jurisdictions have seen this in front of their councils, except I think City of Bellingham, which will be heard next week. So that will be on the committee of the whole agenda. And then alternative 3 is kind of the highest level of growth alternative that's being evaluated. Next slide, please. So I mentioned focusing on alternative 2, which is the multi-jurisdictional, which is kind of a combination of all local jurisdictions, growth concepts and policies combined into this kind of projection of how this population and housing and employment growth will be allocated throughout the communities. In this alternative, it's the highest share of urban growth, and so that's proportional to inside identified urban growth areas. It includes policy changes like transit-oriented development being discussed with the City of Bellingham. It focuses the highest proportion of housing and employment growth inside those identified UGAs and not outside in rural and resource zones. Next slide, please. So very quickly, just a couple high notes here. The majority of the population, so these next two, this chart and the next chart, are included in that multi-jurisdictional resolution. The highest share of population growth will be allocated to the City of Bellingham at 44%. And then the next two, so rural and resource lands are up there at 13%. The City of Ferndale is a little bit higher at 16%. And then the City of Linden is also fairly high in this. Next slide, please. So this chart breaks down that housing unit projections a little bit further, and a new requirement in this comprehensive plan process is that each jurisdiction has to account for housing units by income band. And so you can see those different income bands separated out there and allocated to each local jurisdiction. And then before we get too deep into that, let's go to the next slide, Rochelle. And the way, sorry, one more slide. Okay, so in WTA's long-range transit plan, we identify certain priority populations, right? And so it's portions of the population that we have identified as we need to prioritize service to these populations, one of which are low-income households. And so, Rochelle, if you back up a couple slides, 2 slides, sorry, should be more specific. So with those low-income households, that is anything below 80% of the area median income. And in this chart, there's approximately 12,000 new housing units that are being projected throughout the county that would fall into this category. So there's a very wide range, most of which is allocated within the City of Bellingham. And the least share is in rural and resource zones. You can see those numbers below 80% is less than 1,000 units. So I just wanted to point that out there. Next slide, please. So now touching on kind of the general land use policy support in comprehensive plans, things that you would think of that are associated with like transit-oriented development are characteristics of strong transit supportive growth policies. So it's things like high-density development, mix of uses, active transportation networks, so that's connected sidewalks, bike paths, things that would link our transit facilities to where people live and work. destinations and origins near transit, which goes into kind of the mix of uses, and a street network design. So a street network that we can actually operate transit services on. Next slide, please. I think we're gonna go one more ahead, Rochelle. Thank you. So characteristics that make it more challenging for transit support. These are things like low density uses, single use zoning. If we think about, single family residential zones where you might have a unit every 5 to 10,000 square feet. Larger lot size, which would reduce connectivity to transit services, more auto-oriented street designs, lack of pedestrian infrastructure, things like that.
I just want to mention here that I think we're not trying to be judgmental as far as those land use patterns. I think this is just reflecting that if your goal is to maximize ridership, these are things that are not going to get you there. These are things that if you think about providing broad coverage, you can still provide service, just the expectation should be different than those areas where you're trying to expand ridership. So I just want to make that clear.
Wanted to add that this singles use zone is going away starting 1st of January. So I think that in your plan, when you're looking at future, you should not designate as single use zoning because it will be non-existent from the perspective that there could be new development happening there, right? So I think we should plan that density will go higher in those areas. At least Bellingham is implementing that.
Well, it's still single use.
You're referring to middle housing?
Middle housing is still single use and it's residential. So it's single use, but now there's a multiplicity of types and densities within the single use.
Yeah.
So it's more like you're getting rid of low density moving.
So the density will be higher because this shows the density will stay low.
Right, the pale yellow squares might turn light yellow or darker yellow.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, Rochelle. All right, so this is, so I pulled this straight from our long range transit plan. So this is the network map as projected out to 2040. And so it shows, or it's envisioned a moderate increase in transit service that supports some growth in the UGA areas, as well as along corridors that connect those UGAs. It's assumed that jurisdiction land use policies would support transit service as shown in that previous slide that we talked about, kind of the more uses that support transit services. Next slide, please. So intended takeaways, again, this is just kind of laying base level context for the service allocation discussions, as well as relating it back to each local jurisdiction that our board members represent. So the comprehensive plan that you all have been working on for the past, year plus, in some cases 18 months, really shape your communities, right? And they also have a direct impact on current and future transit services to those residents and employees in your communities. Land use and growth are directly correlated with that transit demand. And I believe you guys touched on that a little bit earlier in the meeting. Transit relies on that type of development. So not necessarily the single use, but also how dense that single use could be, or are there origins and destinations at each location along those corridors. The concentrated mix of use provide higher levels of transit support, and those lower density, more sprawled areas are more difficult to serve with adequate transit service. So again, that was just kind of a contextual, very high level view of how the comprehensive planning process is related to our transit service. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Tim and Maureen to talk about.
Just pause to see if we have any questions about
Go
the
back
presentation.
2 slides. One slide, that one. Oh, next. That map is today's map, and it's also 2040. I guess that strikes me as interesting.
Yeah, we're serving the same corridors.
Yeah.
Primarily, it does show some increased service.
Yeah.
But I think the foundation is pretty much the same quarters for the most part are being served.
And the assumption on here was minimal,
This is
financial.
minimal
Yes.
financial growth, right? So you're having, we also did an enhanced plan, you might recall, that had pretty expansionist idea, and you'd see a lot more corridors on that one.
But it comes with a lot more cost.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
So Bellingham is looking at 3 or 4 UGA decisions. One would be inconsequential if we take like Geneva and those areas out of our UGA. They're already built, it's not going to change depth of your service. There's the South U Street, which is now a low performing WTA route. There is the North Bellingham Reserve area, which is, topped by Smith, and there's Meridian one side. And so that could be a long-term growth area. And then there's the Alderwood area, which is currently populated, so I mean, that'll be a slow growing and maybe difficult area to annex, but in terms of what the city might do in the future, we would be converting that area from under the county's jurisdiction to the city's jurisdiction for further growth. So in terms of like changing the community WTA is serving, really, I think the thing that'll happen first and soonest will be North Bellingham. In the next 5-10 years, that's the area that will probably show the most new growth, because it would become potentially UGA and then potentially annexation. So if you had to plan for what the city's gonna do to the county, that's probably what we're gonna do.
I think the other thing is this, when you look at it, it's still Bellingham centric. Means that what we are trying to plan for bringing people into Bellingham and taking people from Bellingham back to their places, right? I think in 2040, there would be more peripheral or between other cities transit time, like think about that and plan for that, or maybe it could be a little hub type of thing where it's Bellingham is not the only hub, that everything comes and goes out from Bellingham.
Yeah, certainly, I think we see that there's opportunity for that. I think our main take home here is that there's going to be increased transit demand everywhere, given those growth patterns.
Yeah.
And so this will tie into our conversation about our service allocation. Maybe not definitively where that service goes, but how much service goes to different areas of the community, because that does drive your allocation framework does drive those decisions, right? So I think this is good to keep in mind.
Sure.
Where is that growth occurring? Because we know those trips in Linden, those are going to increase, the demand is going to increase, but the demand will also increase to come into Bellingham. So how do you balance those two different types of demand, I think is the question.
And then I think the other thing is how it grows. So if you have a Birch Bay, that's going to be more difficult to serve. Then, so how it develops and setting those expectations.
Columbia
If it's
Valley.
developing in this way, yeah. And then 10 years later, somebody goes, oh, service should be out there for WTA. It's going to be very difficult. So we're trying to look at this and trying to get ahead and set expectations of how things grow, what will and won't work. So we're hoping to get better integration into how things develop as well.
So I'm looking at like Everson, and all our growth is south, like the current auction barn location will eventually be 150 plus houses. But the bus doesn't even come down that section of Everson Goshen Road. It cuts over on Pole and goes down Mission Road, which is serving a vulnerable population on that route too. But just looking at how can we try and accommodate that real growth corridor that we're seeing in Everson, as well as the vulnerable population we see, literally less than a mile away.
I see that a lot of industrial growth in Linden and Ferndale, which is over industrial commercial growth in Bellingham. The Bellingham is running out of space in that sense, that's residential space, but new industrial commercial areas are going to be outside of Bellingham, and that would demand its own needs. Yeah. So connection between Ferndale to Linden and back and forth could become important.
If there are no more questions, we'll go along to, we've got.
Way back in the day, I remember hearing a number about how much residential density was enough to become trend supportive. I think it was like 15 units per acre. Is that still a number? Because we can go through our neighborhoods and we can calculate residential density and say that which ones are transit supported. For example, Happy Valley is transit supported by that neighbor. And so it'd be Columbia, but maybe not Whatcom Falls neighborhood would be transit supported. Is that still a number of 15 units per acre or 12 or?
Yeah, there have been studies done that show what the optimal number is for a certain type of service. So in the case you're talking about, and that is frequent service, we call frequent service, where you have maybe 4 buses per hour or more. So you're going to need a certain density to support that. The key question is how does that density, what does that density look like? You've got to have what we've found is uniform densities along the corridor, not just at certain endpoints, right? Because that may not support that frequent service. It depends on the type of density, and I think that's sort of the conversation with the city about the comp plan. What does it look like in terms of density along those GO line corridors? Is it sufficient to support additional service, right? So it's a complicated question. It's not just one number, but it does sort of drive kind of roughly types of service that we think we can support, have some productivity.
So where I live, my unit, we're like 35 to 40 units per acre. Because I'm in a micro dense area called Fairhaven. But the absolute numbers aren't that large. So Route 1 is good, but it's not great, even though it's got real high transit supported densities at the end and the beginning.
Exactly, and that's a perfect case study of why the ridership isn't as good as you would hope it would be for that corridor, because you've got the 2 ends. Everybody wants to go between those 2 ends, but there is very little ridership in between.
I think in terms of cities, we think in terms of residential densities a lot. So I'm trying to translate, I have a tool so I can translate. When I think residential densities, what am I doing for transit? Is 15 or 12, whatever units per acre, a nice transit number that I can. When I looked at my own planning map as a city official, can I also color code it for transit supporters?
Yeah, it's harder to analyze it from the numbers standpoint versus from the type of project standpoint, right? Multifamily units are typically, you're gonna have that more productive ridership. The income levels too are a big driver of our ridership. It's lower income projects, we get a lot more ridership than a typical family project. So it really depends on the types of projects as well. But from a rough level, you can say maybe 12 to 15 units per acre is what your target should be if you're trying to do frequent service.
The yellow line going from the city to Sudden Valley, so the draft EIS, which will be the EIS, says that Lakeway is going to go beyond a level of service decay that can't really be mitigated or must be mitigated. Would that be more buses and fewer vehicle trips or what?
Yeah, that's just showing that, we're going to continue to serve Sudden Valley, but it doesn't necessarily identify a specific change in the service to Sudden Valley. So I think in this plan, as far as I can recall, there wasn't a significant increase or any increase in service to Sudden Valley. But this plan kept the plumb line, which serves the Lakeway corridor. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but there wasn't a significant change there as far as I can recall.
I think to answer your question, that level of service, it could potentially cause more delays to service out in Sun Valley just for increased traffic that's not mitigated.
And we're seeing still this.
I remember Lakeway is the single worst corridor in all of Whatcom County.
And I think this showed up on the EIS. We didn't mention this, but this is the one corridor in the entire county that the EIS identifies as a failing corridor.
Under all alternatives.
Yep. So let's move along to the part 2 that Maureen's.
So on that happy note.
Yeah, we're gonna do a little refresher.
Because that shows me feeding my face.
And I'm gonna finish with. Then I'm gonna.
That's why I'm saving my donut for later, so I don't get caught in the picture like that.
Question first, I couldn't call. You did, okay, great. Okay, before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that the water bottle ferry came during the break and, those were, our WTA's, offering for Transit Employee Appreciation Day, so. I want to be sure that you had those because we appreciate you as well. Okay, so, our service allocation framework discussion, as you may remember, was a 4-part, originally envisioned as a 4-part series. The second part was the board game, which many of you here were present for, but a couple of you weren't. Today was envisioned as the primary time for the board to speak amongst themselves, with just a little bit of teeing up from staff in order to begin to move towards step 4, which is identifying, sort of a percentage that you would like to see us, how much of our service we should allocate to maximizing ridership and how much to providing broad coverage. So just to locate you and where we are. And by way of review, Rachel, if we could go to the next, Rochelle, if we could go to the next slide, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. We just thought because it's been an awfully long time, it might help just to clear the cobwebs a little bit and get us back to where we ended our last meeting. So I don't know to what extent you had a chance to take a look at these images that we sent before, because they're very faint here, aren't they?
They have printouts.
Oh, very good. They're also in your
I think
packet.
I need one with printouts.
Okay, very good. They're also in your packet, although the pointer I stole from my cats won't work on your pointouts, or your printouts. But anyway, I thought we could just talk a little bit about, if you're willing to play along, which of these 2 places would have higher transit ridership or where we could expect higher transit ridership and some of the reasons why.
The right is more dense.
Okay, density's a big part. Other things?
Roads are weird.
What's that?
The facilities or institutions
Okay,
present.
yes, more destinations.
than,
Yes, absolutely,
stores or,
for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's got a grid, which means that a rider can either walk left or right.
excellent. Right, yes, right. We can assume walkability, but we can see connectivity, which is what you're talking about.
You could go left.
Yes,
catch
exactly.
That bus or right. to catch
Exactly,
that
yeah.
bus. If you're on a dead end, there's only one way to go.
Exactly.
Always, every time.
Yes, yeah, I would call that connectivity and you're absolutely right. Other things? Okay, great. And then just a couple of the things that I would point out are, and again, it's very faint, but imagine that where you are is, yeah, boy, I can barely even make it out. But let's say where you are is here and the bus that you want to reach is here. That is very similar in distance, let's say, from here to here. But what we have in between, I think, if I'm seeing this properly, is like a,
major road,
6-lane,
yeah.
6-lane highway. So there's also, that goes along with connectivity, like how likely would you be, to ride if you had that as an obstacle. And then you also have, if you can imagine, now I think I envision this, if you imagine that for transit to serve this, it would probably be serving these larger roads. Let's say you lived in one of these places and the only way to get to that larger road is either like this or like this. How likely would you be, even if that service was very good, to try and access it? We also talked a little bit earlier about adding riders to our existing service, right? So it's just useful as we go through this conversation and the future conversation to think about how, what sort of land use types would allow for that. And then if you were to think about how much service you would allocate to each of these areas, I would ask you also to think, what difference might it make if, for example, you knew that these were, low car ownership, or let's say like these were, they look like cul-de-sacs of single family, but what if instead they were mobile home parks? How would that weigh into your decision? And then the other thing I wanted to mention was what can we assume, let's say this was a higher income area with much more car ownership, how would that factor in? And then the one other thing I think I had on my list was, one thing we don't see here is a lot of accommodation for parking. So, that they're just all things that would play into play into the transit friendliness. And a lot of this actually was on Hayden's slides earlier, right? When you talked about transit characteristics for good transit. Not so good transit. So let me see.
While you're with the,
Please.
just, you kind of talk about to like what Tim had said is, it's setting expectations and understanding competing values as we're going through things. It's not to say, you know, providing it in a transit-friendly way is the right way to do it. It's setting what are those expectations that come with that and what can be done. Because we recognize that you all have competing values that are put on you from your communities and what you're trying to balance, those things. And so it's really to kind of talk through, to understand what those competing things are and what the outcomes can be from those.
Yeah. I think that we should consider that the robo taxis are coming. I mean, like we need feeders. That's how the airlines work, they have commuter airlines, bring to the main airport and then they go. Like, what if, like you see those e-bikes in Seattle, every corner it looks like somebody abandoned it, but it's connected to the internet, right? I mean, there could be feeder things. I think we should start thinking about those also because that would change the whole strategy.
Right.
The last mile is the hardest place to serve or last 1.5 mile. But if we have the ability, WTA could have these things parked around, so you come and drop it off there and somebody takes it, drop it back there, right? And then you have the main feeder routes and your buses are more full.
But like micro-mobility stuff isn't gonna change the inherent like non-functionality of very undense places where you have and probably not good sidewalk transportation options, right?
Yeah.
Like it's still not gonna make.
But I
transit
think that is the
efficient
factor
in
we should consider.
the county.
The technology is changing so fast. Just if you imagine 10 years ago and what we have today, and yes, imagine 10 years from now.
Right.
And agencies are experimenting with those new forms, right? And it's still early on in the process for that change. But I think fundamentally, public transportation is still going to provide that main service because that's the most efficient way to provide the service.
Yes.
And fundamentally, like they work together, right? Like the goals don't change for what the transit needs to deliver. It's just like the catchment area increases slightly.
Yeah, and kind of the problem with microtransit is the more the demand grows, the more expensive it becomes, the less efficient it becomes versus fixed route service, the more efficient it becomes. The more productivity. So that's the interesting aspect.
The interesting part.
The one on the right is Celebration, Florida.
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
Little rascals and stuff.
I would like to emphasize what Tim just said. In terms of productivity, microtransit costs and benefits scale the same. So productivity never goes up. Whereas with good land use and transit, productivity goes higher and higher. It's more like a technology that grows as opposed to like a fixed investment thing. If I had to choose how to make my money, I'd rather be in a transit agency where I can at least achieve productivity gains as opposed to microtransit where they're going to scale. It'll always stay about as expensive because I can never get the cost down because my effort always goes up with number of people I deliver.
Michael, there's another way to think. If we looked at our finances, 72% is just wages. It means people. Now just imagine if we have people less buses, driverless buses and driverless microtransit, right? We have to start thinking about that. That would change the whole landscape.
But I also think it changes the economic impact of WTA as a major employer in our community, which is very, very valuable. And I would take, as a community member, I'd take a job over a driverless bus.
But can't stop technology. I think that, no, you have a good point. But if you look at this last 30, 40 years, how the society has transformed, it's very hard to stop that thing, like grocery stores, another example.
But I look at my dad, using my parents as an example, when he was 16 and in high school, he thought by the time his kids were driving, we'd be driving cars like Jetsons, that we'd be driving flying cars. So just because we
Yeah.
think it in the moment doesn't necessarily mean that it is inevitable. I mean, there is some growth and progression of technology, but just because we think it now does not.
Doesn't mean it's
It
gonna
doesn't mean it's
happen.
inevitable,
Yeah.
but, and again, I think too, especially an agency, community service provider like WTA, we do have to equate people as more important than other variables.
Okay,
Okay.
on to you.
Okay, if there are no more questions on that, so we're gonna move to the third part of this section, and that is, Rochelle, if you could advance a slide, okay, yeah, right there. So this next part, as we described in the email, we're gonna ask you 2 questions, okay? And this is, we're not trying to get a decision here today, just to be super clear, this is just gut feel, where do you think we are today, or where we should be today in our service allocation? Or where we should be in our service allocation. Today, we're at 40% maximized ridership, 60% broad service coverage, so you know where we're at today. We're gonna be asking you, and this is a key question, this next question is really key. Should this apply to what we have today? Or should it apply as if sometime in the future we're ever able to add service? Should this apply only to the new service? So it would be more of an incremental change over time. So what we're gonna ask you to do, based on what you've learned, based on the game, based on the refresher, for you to take a sticky note, and we're gonna ask you to come up to this board here and place where you think we should be with that service allocation. And then are we gonna do a sticky note under each of those questions? Okay, 2 different sticky notes. Okay, 2 different sticky notes. I guess you have 2 different ones. Where, if this should apply to the existing or the new service.
Is it either or?
It's an either or question, yeah. Because if you're doing existing, we're implying that that also applies to new service, if that makes sense.
So as an
I
example,
see what you're
if somebody were to say, hey, I want to be 50-50,
Yeah,
they would
you
put,
put your sticky right in the middle of the,
But I think what Skip is asking about is, is this an either or? Existing
right, that's what I was
versus-
getting to, was
Oh, sorry,
walking through, like, if you were to say 50-50, you would put
your,
there,
Post-it.
and then you would do another post-it that
Exactly.
said,
and only in one
would
of
that
those
a
two. correct?
50-50 move apply to do service only?
I
or-
see.
Yeah.
The 60-40, is that like expenditure or what is the?
no, those are based on revenue hours, it's actual hours that are being provided.
And we're 40%.
40%
That's where we are today.
maximize
No,
ridership, frequent service, those are the go lines. And then everything else is considered part of that 60%. So think about the gold, the green, the campus blue line, the plumb lines, those are frequent service. So what we're gonna do is this is just kind of where you think you're at, just gut
So based on
level.
this moment, yeah.
Then we're gonna circle back around and I'm gonna share the 3 scenarios to show you different choices, right? If you did a 30-70 coverage, if you did a 60-40 maximize ridership, what that would look like on the ground, what changes that could necessitate.
Okay, so Allie's got her post-its already separated.
Okay,
Take
so
a
everybody
moment.
come up when you're ready.
Put him up there.
What's that?
Do you want our
Oh,
names
put 'em
on
up there
these?
if you wouldn't mind.
Just, you don't have to put your name on it, just put them up there.
There should be an audit.
You can put somebody else's.
Put Michael's name on it.
All done by now.
Yeah, right. It's always from this.
Suddenly I would have
We'll make sure.
So this would be, if you, let's say you're not going 100% maximize ridership.
Yeah. You would
You
put
want us
one
to
on
start
that line.
In order to make that happen.
So
We can't go back.
Only apply that to the new.
So that's more,
Or to the existing.
more coverage.
To the number plus new.
Michael, if you want more coverage or more ridership.
That's
may
the way
need
I
to-
heard it.
No, I think I got it.
Think your brain will be
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because the continuum.
How to visualize.
I just want to make sure you.
more ridership.
I'm 3 months old.
So I think, Todd, you want more ridership or more broad?
All right.
Okay, so it's.
Yeah, this is a little confusing.
It's the opposite.
It's just the opposite. You gotta move it all the way over here.
I want more ridership.
Yeah,
That's what I was trying to figure out.
Where you want that line
I
to
want
be.
that line to all the way over here.
Think of it as a
Yeah.
bar.
Oh,
so-
See what I mean?
we want, you actually, where you want to be.
Yeah.
No, I want
Without
to
a
do this.
Slider, okay, there you go.
Backward. So that might be.
Yeah.
I swear.
I just wanna get rid of all the
it would
service
seem
certificate.
backwards too, and I mean,
I was
we'll make sure they all get.
Actually, the ridership is like a little sticker by the
Closest to Broad Coverage. Imagine it's like a bar.
Okay.
If we could slide it.
Riderships, I want to grow the line.
But I think right now it's
You get the
60.
information.
You're saying it's 60%.
So, if I could have you look at the screen for a second,
There we go.
think about the bar looking like this.
Drag this.
Yeah, well,
The yellow is the filled space.
That makes sense?
Oh, it's here. Okay.
Oh, I see.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're up- yeah.
It's hard to draw that.
It feels bad.
I think it needs to be more than.
Yeah, usually when you do it, it's a mind twister.
That's what you did, that's what you did.
Yeah.
I have a really important question.
sure you can.
Sure you can.
I'm a. I guess I got it.
That was a joke.
Nor do they know I do.
Look at our mission.
I have
More people next to the city, you're gonna, I mean, it's like the Senate
Right,
versus the
this is
House.
future.
So which is more?
Well, I'm going that way.
Yeah.
That was usually.
Okay.
Yeah, it would, yeah.
So can I hear from a couple board members why you picked the number you picked? We're just gonna do a real brief assessment here, maybe just a few. Why do you think we should be at your percentage? What percentage did you pick? Why did you pick that percentage? Cody?
Well, for me, if I move that continuum anything to the right, the smaller communities are gonna get hit somehow. And so how do we, I mean, and that's, in my mind, it's a big piece of the tax base too. And how do we service those people with less? I mean, how do we service them if you're gonna
Right.
service more
If there's less
Bellingham people, but
accessibility.
give Bellingham people better service? That was my logic. So I moved my line just a little bit to the.
Sorry, I have to leave, I'm going somewhere else, so thank you, everybody.
I like the Olympia model. That's fine.
Okay. Or more towards maximizing ridership. Is that-
Yeah, just make a new transit agency.
So I was actually thinking a lot about the financial implications. The only way for us to have higher productivity is more riders per bus. The only way to get that is to have more urban routes and more ridership. Sorry, it's all my fault.
All right, okay, thanks for that. So what I'm gonna do next is, I promised I would show 3 allocation scenarios, so just, thinking about like the practical effects of changing the allocation one way or the other, just to share with you some examples of what that would look like. And I think the take home here is these are simply examples. This is not our route planning. But yeah, it's just to show you the scale of the changes needed to shift the allocation one way or the other. So don't get too attached to the maps or the data is the point here. This first one is, I've mentioned existing service, 60% coverage, 40% maximized ridership. Some examples of maximizing ridership are go lines, basically 4 buses an hour, broad coverage, pretty much everything else, right? Your rural service or 60, 30-minute routes in Bellingham and other places, right? And this is our map showing the blue, showing the frequent routes, the go lines. Everything else throughout the county is what we call, for the purpose of this conversation, coverage service. Okay. So keep in mind that blue, because you'll see that blue again in future maps. So the first scenario is, what if we shifted to more coverage? So this move that needle over to 30% maximized ridership, providing more broad coverage. What are the kinds of things that we would need to do to realize that percentage change with, and these are all on the existing service. We're talking about existing service here. New service, that's kind of something separate, right? Under this scenario, some additions could be, you could add 1 or 2 microtransit zones with that shift. In case you're wondering about the hours, it's about 14,000 hours to get to that 30% maximized ridership, 70% coverage. We could add service to rural routes if we wanted to. We could increase maybe service. Those buses that are 1 bus an hour, 60-minute service to 2 buses an hour. So those are some examples of things that you could do to increase coverage. What would you need to do? Obviously, you would have to decrease some service on some GO lines. So in this example, we're talking about, well, let's decrease the blue line, which goes through Campbell's. Let's decrease the Lakeway service, but that could apply to the gold line. It could apply to the green line too. But point is, you would decrease it to the point where it would no longer be a GO line, it'd be less than 4 buses per hour. And the map, first map showing if you added a microtransit zone, in this particular case, Birch Bay, and our study showed that's about 14,000 hours to serve Birch Bay with a microtransit service. And everything else stays the same in this condition, but you're decreasing your frequent service to the, zoom in here for a bit, the plumb line and the blue line. That's the first one, or.
Can I add a little variation on that, just so I can understand? So like, take Linden, I know Linden. If you would put a circulator in, say, every half an hour or 2 in town, and then 1 to Bellingham, it might increase ridership, because right now in Linden, you can't go from A to B and B to A easily. Without going to Bellingham and back.
Right. And we're not saying you can't increase ridership by increasing service below that 4 buses an hour. We're just simply saying if you want to get the most riders on your buses, then you're going to have to get to that level that supports people getting out of the cars, basically. So it's a scale.
Yeah, you may get a few more people for what you're suggesting. Yeah, but it wouldn't qualify as high maximum ridership.
Before you go to the next one, could you go back 2 more, just for a second?
Here or
Next one over.
This one.
Next one.
This one.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, or if you want to maximize coverage or provide service coverage, you could increase service to in your rural areas, right? The 75 to Birch Bay, or the 71X to Sumas, or the 72 to Palm Bay Valley, or it could be to Linden, could be to Ferndale, right? You could increase it that way. Or you can increase here's a couple 60-minute routes that go to 30-minute routes, right? And these are to scale. So we've scaled the number of hours, we put them into these particular areas. So it shows you basically the scale changes that you can make by selecting this particular scenario. More balanced one is if we did a 50-50 split. You'll see when we start getting into the maximized ridership, I think your point, Michael, that it starts to get kind of expensive and more difficult, because then you're reducing service from areas, right? You're reducing, you're not just additive, but you're reducing areas of coverage. So in this example, just based on the rapid transit project, we're going to 10-minute service, so that's 5 buses per hour on the gold and green lines, and we can add 1 more GO line. So we'd add maybe Samish Way, that's where an urban village is. So just to give some examples of where those additions could occur. And so we would have to remove some coverage service somewhere. In this case, the least productive, that could be the U Street service, Cordata, Electric and Alabama Hill area, and then maybe probably some kind of rural service in order to balance the numbers. Yeah. So, and again,
my fist in my head.
These are pure examples of the kinds of changes that would have to take place, right? We're not proposing anything. And so this map shows you then that red is what's being removed. The green is what's being added with frequent service. So it gives you the scale, like where some of those changes take place. And a lot of this is actually removing routes in this particular case.
And this would be to move us from
that 50-50 percentage split, right? More maximizing ridership. right? So there's a lot of changes that would need to be made. And then the final scenario we have is, let's just push the needle even further over on the maximized ridership. And so do all the things I mentioned in the last one, but then you can add, maybe you add the Red Line back, the Fairhaven service. You could maybe do a Ferndale Express route, you know? You could do one more Go Line service. So you could do quite a bit of frequent service, but again, you're doing quite a bit of changes. And in this case, I said, well, let's just eliminate Sunday service to make that work, except for the Go Lines. So significant change to make that happen. That Sunday is not going to show up on the map app, obviously, but
And that's all because to afford the switch.
for the switch, exactly, right? It's just switching over those hours and that cost to that maximized ridership.
So how are we allocating our resources to accomplish that goal?
Exactly, possible. Yeah. So the green is what's additive, the red's what we're taking away plus Sunday service. So this is, in my opinion, this is pretty extreme. You're removing a lot of service to make that, to get those frequency gains in this area. But we wanted to show those extreme examples so you get a sense of how that might change if you did apply it in the real world. So
Benefit ridership would go up because you got the 60% per hour,
Yeah.
which you would be disaffecting these other.
you would take away service from many different areas, right? A lot of people would not have service, but those services you're adding, you get a lot more riders, you know, in your core areas primarily.
We'd be offering more service in the types of places we saw, right?
So I want to hear reactions to this.
Sunday service, allow you to shift resources because those buses can't be doubled up on the next day. It's only one bus. So I don't, how does limiting Sunday service really create that much more capacity on the rest of the week?
Yeah, we would.
It's labor, it's not bus.
Yeah.
Labor. It's labor. Oh,
Yeah.
So it's the drivers.
It's the driver. You take them out on Sunday and put them in on Tuesday.
Yeah.
You also have other groups that don't come to work on Sunday if you shut it down, right? So the whole operation would be shut down.
Although in this case, in this example, you're still operating, so it's.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. That's right. Yeah, right. He would.
What's 70-30 look like?
I didn't do 70-30, but yeah, it's more of this.
You did 70-30 the other way.
Imagine red everywhere outside of Bellevue.
Yeah, I think that's.
And more green in Bellevue.
Yeah. Any other comments on this? Is this helpful, like to get a sense of, like when you're, because, you know, I think we were worried, you're moving the needle, so you know what you're doing, right? And hopefully this will tell you, okay, these are the kinds of changes on a high level that you need to make for us to move that needle in that way.
The assumption on this is current resources. No
I was gonna say, yeah,
additional-
3 people chose new service only, but yeah, we 2 can.
I would say too, you know, if we were moving to this extreme, that the rural communities would have some kickback on, we're not going to fund something that we are not participating in. So then there would be a reduction in resources. I mean, not a huge reduction, but there could be a potential reduction in resources available that may not get you to where you were trying to go anyway, as well as some residual bad feelings. So,
Well, I think eliminating access to the people who need it most, even if it's an underperforming route, is never a good idea. I mean, we've seen studies that show that access to transit leads to less child abuse, less domestic violence, all of those things because they're able to get out of the home, right? Michael and Forrest, yeah.
So I want to acknowledge the legitimacy of the human value statements that were made
You're
here.
sitting between us.
No, no. For the moment, for the moment, pretend I don't care about the human concerns. I'm saying we should do that. That's immoral. But pretend for the moment we don't. Where's my tax base? Financially speaking, I should serve. If I just serve based on tax base, and for each of those scenarios, can you show me the financial productivity numbers? Because my guess is going in this direction, my productivity numbers. If I wanted to run a successful business that only cared about dollars and served the people who paid into the system, I think this might make sense. And the reason not to go this way is because now we add back in the human factor.
Well, the balance has to be adding that factor back in. It's a matter of how much, in my opinion. And I totally agree with you, man. If we cut the service to everywhere else, yeah, the blowback's gonna be, first of all, no service or a lot less. And why should we fund that or help fund that?
Of course.
And I have a few thoughts. I think, I wonder, and I don't usually come to these meetings, so I don't have a ton of background, so I'm going a little bit out on a limb, but I think about, we talk about these certain areas not having service. How does that compare to areas where people live not having the level of service that they need to get where they want to go? I feel like those are kind of comparable. They don't really have where these people are densely populated. They don't have the service they need to at the times that they need it. That's basically equivalent of not having service, I think, at some degree. I think when we think about equity, we should think about equity for the population, not for geographic areas. And I think those denser areas not only provide the revenue, but there's more people, there's equity in having them have the service that gets them where they need to get, when they need to get it. And I really think, you know, the presentation on from the planning, like thinking about how we're planning to grow and and structuring our service to match that, I think is going to be really important. Because we can't have the density in Bellingham that we're talking about having without functional transit service.
Just on an economic impact standpoint, is how many people from rural Whatcom County outside of Bellingham come into Bellingham to shop? And if our, you know, our main revenue stream is sales tax, how much is the county contributing in sales tax revenue? And again, reducing service or eliminating service. It's beyond, I you talked about people in Bellingham funding Bellingham, but there's more to, there's more nuanced than that. We, you know, I come into Target and everywhere else. I mean, I try and shop at Everest Market, but I have a graduation coming up, and my mom went to Costco, and I'm going to Winco and Cash and Carry and spending probably $1,000. So there's sales tax implications as well from outside of Bellingham that contributes to the revenues for these services.
Yeah, so whenever I think about reduction in service, the tough part for me to figure out for a Linden community is paratransit piece. Because the fixed route is not used very much, but I'm servicing a lot of paratransit people. And when I think about reduction in service, you know, I guess
that's a policy choice though.
It is, yeah.
I just can't imagine service getting any worse outside of Bellingham.
Yeah. And then I guess a point I said a minute ago that was, I think, a shock to Skip is that in Linden, you can go from A to B. But the only way to go from B to A is to go all the way to Bellingham and do the loop again. And that's true for all of the rural routes, is you can't, there's no way except, so it's really a Bellingham centric system regardless.
And I think that's gotta be dealt with somehow.
Well, we used to have a
Circulator
circulator in town, but that went out years ago, years ago. And it probably was non-cost effective at that. But
you know, I think there's a perception of staff that this is a minimal level, especially this rural area. It's like, it would be hard to cut much back, right? It's minimal service to Linden to Ferndale. You know, you can't reduce it much more and still have meaningful service. So I think that's the reality. The system we have, like, either don't have it or you keep or enhance that service.
And my 6/10 for my citizens is 2.5 million. I think they look at that and go, am I getting 2.5 million worth of value?
Well, but
so, I mean, I'm curious to hear more about the Olympia model, where if you scaled it to a Ferndale Bellingham centric transit agency, that rural folks aren't paying the tax anymore. Is there something that if they want to vote, which they probably wouldn't approve, to tax themselves to provide some sort of service out there? Would that capacity be enough to do the paratransit and such now? I mean, if you're talking 2.7, and and then we're competing against each other for grants. But we haven't talked, it was some weird, we're not taking our first sales tax capacity right now. One additional option is going to the ballot, and we've tried this before. Bellingham will say yes, and the rest of the county will say no. And at what point do we keep constraining the planning for density in Bellingham at the expense of the unwillingness for folks in the county to raise the taxes to increase service?
So everyone does understand what the Olympia model is, what Todd's referring to, or?
No, go
Maybe a
ahead.
little, okay, that's important, yeah. Yeah, so Olympia used to be a countywide service, just like, or excuse me, intercity transit used to be a countywide service, just like we are. And their county, correct me if I'm saying this in the wrong way, but essentially their outlying communities decided to opt out. And so the agency shrunk to serve those places that are more transit conducive, right? And so they now serve the city of Olympia and
Lacey Tumwater.
Lacey and
But not
Tumwater.
Yelm, for example.
But not Yelm, for example, yeah, good, so.
And
So,
then they voted to increase.
and then they
the-
also voted
Yeah.
to, yes, that's
So
right,
they
to increase
shrunk
their
and
sales
voted-
tax.
That group voted to increase the tax so that they could afford to go for it.
Yeah.
And they
But-
increased service.
They doubled their tax rate to 1.2%.
We had it on the ballot years ago to increase the sales tax and it failed as it passed in Bellingham. So Bellingham did the transportation benefit district for a while. I mean, so the willingness is there and the tax capacity is there, and we're underperforming in terms of what the community is willing to pay for in Bellingham.
Right.
No offense, but to provide this very expensive service that is apparently not satisfactory.
Is it
That's so
legally
true.
possible to have two overlapping PTVA?
So it's got everything about it. I would have to figure out,
Right.
and could you have different tax rates across the same PVTA?
Yeah, but you could have overlapping ones, and then, so there's a countywide rate or service area wide rate, and then there's another service area wide rate, but it's probably at a much lower rate, and that would be additive. And then it's added, so Bellingham would have a higher service because only Bellingham would pay into it, but to do that, you'd have to either have, basically, different tax rates or two overlapping PDAs.
Or something like the transportation benefit district, which was very similar
Adds
to
on,
that
layers
model,
on, yeah.
right? That layered on top of the countywide PTBA sales tax through the tax for Walker or Bellingham residents.
We still use that tax, we just don't use it in the same way, so again, you have to have an overlapping duplication of this taxation.
And operationally, it was a lot easier in that because that transportation benefit district just brought back Sunday service, which was mainly in Bellingham anyway. If you did something like that, then you have to try to allocate service based on. So it becomes a little complicated.
I'm not proposing a divorce, I'm just kind of putting it
Yeah,
in
no,
perspective,
no,
and I'm
we're
going in
talking
6
about
months
it.
too.
Open wide this year, right?
You should drop the bomb now. Just
Get my thoughts out.
And a lot of the county residents though would still be paying the tax, because they go into Bellingham and shop, and so their sales tax.
They'd be paying a tax.
Yeah.
For you,
But
not for us. Because we're still paying
No,
$4 a
it-
gallon of gas.
We're collecting the sales
And
tax
we don't let
in
the
city.
retail stuff go
When
into
you
the
drive into the
corporate
city
areas.
and buy something, you're paying the city sales tax rate, right? So the sales tax is geographic, not residential.
I think,
Well, yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but I think Bellingham, like Linden, we're getting over 60% of our sales tax through destination sales tax, not retail sales.
Oh, it's way less for us.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
See, for Linden, it's 65%.
What is destination?
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah, we get the
We
bulk
got
of our
car
sales.
dealerships,
Yeah.
so. It's hard to order those online.
The unincorporated areas started getting more of that sales tax during COVID when everyone was buying everything online. Because we don't have retail in the incorporated area, but that spiked it.
And there was a change. The destination tax emerged as a new thing 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, shortly
Yeah.
before COVID.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of an increase during COVID with the Amazon.
I just go back to ridership and productivity. We get more service if the bus is full. The only way to have a full bus is to drive it through parts of towns and have lots of origins and destinations along the route. There's no way you can drive up our productivity, financially speaking, and ridership wise, unless you move towards the maximizing ridership dimension.
And if Bellingham is gonna get more dense, which it is, and we're gonna drive most of the growth into Bellingham, which I think makes sense. Bellingham's also gonna need a transit system that can support that.
And reducing parking requirements.
So
Yeah.
tell me about Ferndale, because that's fast growing. It's like, it's a big hub. Is it, the land use plan, does Ferndale look transit supported? If Ferndale keeps growing quickly, which it's doing, will
So-
it become more transit friendly?
We talk a lot about that, and yeah, I think that we're doing a lot of development in places that, I mean, to hopefully support more transit out there, like Portal Way. You know, and we're kind of in the middle of a big study on Portal Way to kind of push some stuff for Grandview, but also with, you know, Unity Care and I think 350 residential units being built on Portal Way right now, like, they're kind of trying to, I think, bridge the gaps in these places where things have kind of sprawled out all over the place. And so, yeah, we think a lot about transit as we're going through all of this. I was also gonna say, as someone who has spent like, kind of gone back and forth between Bellingham and Ferndale my whole life, spending about half in each place, living on a GO line and knowing that I could get a bus every 15 minutes, to, you know, go have cocktails was very nice. But I could have waited 30, like, and those buses were empty a lot. That was like right on, you know, Northwest going
232.
downtown.
Just being in Olympia, in February, the free fare buses were empty. I mean, I rode once where there was me and another employee on there riding the bus between the hotel downtown to the Capitol building.
Where they run the free service there? Where it's like, is it circuit leaders? What are they?
It's the entire system.
It's a
Yeah.
system.
And that's why they shrunk it down, so they're not going
Okay,
out
so I
into,
misunderstood.
yeah.
It's also fare free was part of that.
I will say, I mentioned earlier that WTA at one point had the highest ridership increase in the nation. Part of it was the universal bus pass, but the other part of it was the GO lines, you know, increasing the number of people who had access to service every 15 minutes. And some of them might be empty, but you know, the green and the gold and the blue lines are definitely highest rider.
And as far as productivity, we do much higher than most other agencies in the state. Part of that is Western. That's our number seven.
Because we had public comment in here years ago that, you know, WTA is Western Transit Association.
38%.
That's more like a 60-40.
Yeah.
Well, now after the discussion, would you change the position you're at? And you don't have to answer that now, but just give that some thought as we continue this conversation. Like where do you think you're gonna be at next time we ask you? Are you gonna be at a place you feel comfortable with a number, right? That could provide some guidance to our planning, to provide some guidance for the future.
You know, Scott, you mentioned that paratransit being the piece that really feels like you should pass up, you know, like, and I wonder if that's a scenario that's worth looking at where some of those fixed routes, maybe in, I don't know what kind of ridership they have, but maybe think about what it looks like for them to go away but maintain the same level of para. You know,
Yeah.
Recognizing it's more expensive, but
Yeah.
as a middle ground.
Yep. You know, and just over the years, we've added paratransit, but Birch Bay is the big example. We added a huge paratransit area, right? Just to provide that minimal level of service, knowing that the 75 probably was not increasing necessarily, but there was that paratransit need. So we've done those kind of changes, and that's not reflected in these numbers. But I guess if you did, it would show a lot more coverage happening based on the number of hours.
I mean, the scenario in my mind, if you could get say you eliminated Lennon, get all 6 tenths back, can you go to our citizens and ask for 2 tenths to privately fund some service that would take care of it? Can you do it for $1 million? I don't know. But there's some happy medium in here somewhere where you can take care of those needy citizens.
Could you look at it from a perspective of whatever each community actually needs or feels they actually need? And then provide that level of service to them. Like if it's Linden, we need so much of this and so much of this. As opposed to having a formula that tries to get total equity. It'd be more based on what each community, at least I'm thinking Linden, Ferndale, wherever they are playing, what they feel they need in terms of service based on the level of growth that they're going to have. Do they think we need more? We need maybe, again, I'm just pulling stuff out of the air. One goal line somewhere. We need something that goes from, that allows us to go within our area and back. And maybe a little bit going into the big city and back. And someone else might need another level of each one of those services. I mean, I'm just listening to you.
Right.
And listening to Ally and going, what service does your area need? And then base our decisions somewhat on that.
I think that's hard too, because everyone's answer is gonna be a little more, like, I think even Bellingham, like, everybody wants a little more what we have.
No, I'm not talking about the necessary level, but form, meaning we need more of this and less of this.
Right.
But you would be the ones determining that.
I guess for me, to make a better sales pitch for my citizens that we're getting good value, I always throw out pairs $85 a ride. I think fixed is $10 a ride. And when you do a ridership, the math doesn't work for Linden, but for Linden, is a paratransit ride really $85 or is it $110 for Linden because it's a longer distance? And is a fixed ride $20 because it's bigger distance? And maybe if it's that much more, I am getting my $2.5 million worth. That might, for me, it might be a sales pitch I can use to promote the service as opposed to always like, yeah, we don't get our value, sorry.
Challenges, if you will, from my foxhole is how do you run a countywide system? And if you break it down into individual areas, it's harder to develop a system that works well together. And that's one of the challenges I'm trying to think through.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that point too, the service we provide provides multiple benefits, right? Regardless of where you're at. So you're going out to Birch Bay, you're serving Blaine, you're serving Ferndale along the way. You're not just serving one community along the way, and that's true with all of our work service operates that way. Plus, the service you're getting in Bellingham is benefiting rural residents as well as you're coming in for this destination, going to a hospital. You want to be able to get to your ultimate destination. So it's really hard to pick those things apart, right? That you can't really pick the system apart and say, this is purely benefiting one particular group. It's a system, right? You pull one string and maybe unravel somewhere else, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge.
The other thing, going back to I was just gonna say, going back to the game is that, different communities may have a different idea of what they think they might like better. And if you're talking about productive service, there really isn't such a thing as productive service unless you have certain characteristics and high frequency, right? So maybe you could have a different flavor of service, but there isn't any such thing as having highly productive service in certain areas based on those things about their density and their walkability and their connectivity.
Yeah, and then I think it's kind of a hope from this discussion too is, we may make a systematic decision that we still need to serve East County because of, say, income levels and those kinds of things. So it may be low productivity, may not have the land use things to stimulate large ridership, but there may be reasons we still want to invest in that area. And the hope from this is try to make it deliberate choices that, yes, we are making a decision. We are going to put this level of service there, but for these reasons.
And here's why, yeah, that's right.
And there may be buses without very many riders, like as you make the comment, oh, that bus didn't have any riders. Well, that was intentional, right? We were providing that service because those people need it the most, and you're gonna have times where not many people are gonna ride those buses, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's because we've done this competing value judgment and said, okay, this is where we want to invest.
I'm gonna make one more pitch for moving to ridership. That's because, again, looking at our financial position long-term. If we move towards ridership, get greater productivity, I think we might be more financially viable so that we can continue to serve the rural areas. The way I can guarantee service to those parts of the county is making sure the system as a whole is financially viable. To do that, let's create financial productivity where it's possible to do so. So the entire system is healthy enough to continue sustaining the entirety of it.
I think at the kind of the tactical level too, one of the things that we're trying to do is look at what are those routes that have grown over the years because somebody said, I want to stop here, or there's 3 or 4 people that say, hey, I want to get to like whatever, and then you put a route in and then it starts. So I think we need to look at those too and do a scrub on those and have those value discussions too. And then maybe that feeds more money back into the system to redeploy those assets elsewhere. Which is ultimately what we're trying to do is say we have a limited supply of assets. How do we provide intentional, deliberate service to people to connect people to opportunities? And then that balances these two.
Can I make sure I understand your point, Michael? Because I think what you were saying was, we were at a point where our ability perhaps to continue doing what we're doing is in jeopardy, right? Because our costs are outpacing our revenues. And so, if we're not looking at expanding service, but we are looking at keeping up with growth, we're looking at getting more people on our existing service. You're saying that our ability to serve more people with the same amount of money would help us preserve our capacity to continue.
We could maybe solve this long-term alligator problem.
Yeah.
And by solving that alligator problem, we keep all of the rural service at its current level or growing with the need.
Right.
But if we don't solve the alligator graph, and funny thing is we can maybe solve the alligator graph by maximizing ridership in areas where it's possible to maximize ridership.
But in my mind, the only way you're get productivity increases, but unless you start doing something at the fare box, your sales tax is only going up so fast. So your base money ability to grow your system isn't there.
And that's one of the reasons driving this fair discussion is, we're looking at our revenue levers and sales taxes, the vast majority, and that's volatility, you can't control that. What are other things that you could control it, and why you can't control fares necessarily? If you drive up ridership, you are driving up fares.
Yeah. Your scenario only works if it's a revenue generator.
Well, I'm like I said, I'm trying to increase the number of riders on the bus.
I understand, but we only have so much
And keep
money
up with-
available.
Scales revenue faster than costs.
But if our revenue stream is sales tax.
It's independent of our ridership.
Our productivity numbers would look better than the
Yeah.
riders we have, but not necessarily the costs.
And we would be meeting our mission better, right? So the reasons people care about getting people on the bus, would be greatly impacted.
At least it got you thinking.
Yeah, you're right. It's
So that's where all these things come together, right? So we're trying to look at things holistically, because each of us have a Or don't have, if depending,
And then to Todd, there's 2 tents out there that you could vote in. But if you have the whole county not getting any service out of that 2 tents, then it all goes to Bellingham, you understand why it'll fail. Even with the really good stuff.
It failed no matter what.
It'll fail no matter what, okay. Good, and it won't come up again.
Well, unless it's like a TBD thing, and that's another thing, the city could start putting some of that money back to WTA, that
Yes.
part of the original idea.
You have another 1/10 available in TBD, because we took it in London. It's consummate. Saying.
We take 2 tents.
There's 3 tents
There's 3
available.
tents?
Yeah, we took our 3rd tent. We're
Did
the
they add
highest.
that? Did they add that?
Yeah,
Okay.
we just took it this year because we're running out of money. So we have the highest tax rate in the county.
Do you really?
We do.
Look at Billingham's jealous.
9.1.
I gotta get on this.
The sucker, don't tell anybody.
You just did.
No one takes the receipts anymore anyway, they just, cashier's going
Question,
away.
Joel, the TBD brings in about 5 million a year?
it's more than that.
Only 6?
That's
So if
2
if
tents,
we
that's-
added
that'd be-
another 10th, maybe $2.5, $3 million increment.
Keep up with London.
Yeah, there you go.
Back fees.
Yeah. That's what we do.
So how much is it worth to you to not have that information here?
It's a public, and it's out there.
He's unopposed.
So let me just go through this. If I had $3 million, if councilmanically we voted an increase after consultation with our constituents and raised $2.5, $3 million more a year to specifically buy frequency in Bellingham, can we actually buy that much frequency?
How much were you saying? What's the scale?
Let's say 3 million at best.
Yeah, you're doing probably the 50-50 split option there. You're probably adding a go line, you're probably adding.
Without rural's reduction.
Yeah, without the reduction, yeah, just make that clear. Yeah, you'd probably be adding a Sandwich Way go line, you'd probably be adding 10-minute service on green and gold. 2 to 3 million, yeah, that's probably about the scale you're talking about.
Save a little money to get that bike line off.
So can I just throw
It's a
another
different
perspective in, is that sales tax is the most harmful to the people that we're trying to serve the most, seniors. I mean, when you add another one,
And utility tax.
yeah.
Well, and you could argue fare collection is actually the worst of that.
But this would be just taxing Bellingham.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're good with that on this end.
You do need Bellingham.
Except we just discussed that tax is hopeless.
Well, I know, when I go to Cash and Carry and
Yeah.
Winco and Target.
Yeah, those are, kind of shows the push and pull of trying to run a system in a very different geographically diverse county. Yeah, are you? I think there's some good discussion.
For sure, yeah.
Do you are you ready to move on to the
I
next
mean,
steps?
unless there is more, it just sounded to me maybe. it was- Anybody else have any? Okay. All right, so I think originally we had told you that we would be looking for a final decision or some consensus in July. I think now we're looking at August instead. Does that sound right? But
Because there's more time at the workshop to discuss as opposed to an hour meeting where this would take some time.
right, yeah, but so if between now and then, if there are things that you think it would be helpful to know, you can either connect with us in the in-between times, or you can request that we bring things to that next conversation, but that would be our hope and our goal, is that we would answer these 2 questions for real. Sort of at a policy level, have a service evaluation.
Again, this is guidance. It's not a hard and fast decision, but it's something that we're gonna try to work towards and plan towards. And be the lens with which we would look at it.
Right.
I think, besides the value.
So as you saw service changes come up in front of you, that would reflect your values here.
That sounds okay. August is gonna be fun.
Yeah.
I'll make that meeting.
You made that decision now, as you were sitting here.
Todd's gonna be sick.
I Based on the discussion, I think the fair thing, the first couple options have been really big on the table. That's what I'm hearing from people in the room.
On the fairs.
The alternatives 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, right.
I don't think we got towards 3 or 4. That's up for decision in August or July.
And that, I don't.
It
It
is trying to get
chaos.
preferred options. I would be curious if you guys want more discussion on fare free at the July meeting, or do you want us to focus maybe more on option 3 and 4?
Yeah, I don't think we need
Okay, that's helpful, so we can structure the discussion that way. Thank you.
It's sort of like, think of it like an EIS that we've got, you know, the no action alternative across, that we're trying to narrow down what to study.
Yeah, I think fair free just creates more issues. More expense.
All right, one happy announcement, transit trivia is June the 10th, so next Tuesday at Laramie. Big bus there, it's right by the
Logger, not
station.
park.
What's that?
Logger, not park.
Oh,
Yeah, Larry Logger.
Yeah.
I was
thinking- Yeah, no. Laramie Logger. It's Ride Transit Month is next month. So it's a way to celebrate that.
Ride the bus there.
Absolutely.
It's right next to the
It's right
transit
next to the transit station, yep, that's the. And then, in, what's the Bell's game, July?
Oh, maybe Genevieve will unmute. I think it's July 27th. It's a Sunday.
Oh, yeah, I'm here, don't worry.
Great.
It is Sunday, July 27th at 1:30 or like 1:25 potentially. At the Bells game. So if anybody's interested, let me know and I can get some tickets handed out. But it should be a lot of fun. We'll have somebody throwing the first pitch, somebody singing the national anthem. There will be plenty of WTA Hawaiian shirts. And I think like hot dogs are $2 on Sunday. So a lot of things to look forward to.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Genevieve.
Yeah, I'll be in town.
Okay, so. Okay, that's all we have from the staff side.
Good job.
Boris, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks to the board for giving up 4 hours of your morning. Appreciate it. Hopefully, you found it productive, and I appreciate you all coming in person too. Really helps quite a bit on these discussions. So thank you very much. Joel, thanks for coming.
Oh, I'll ask someone else later.